my family, put me in a nursing home and sold my ranch. The deed still had my name on it. The day my grown children checked me into a nursing home. Just until you're back on your feet, Dad. I let myself believe they cared. I wanted to believe it. A man wants to believe it about his own blood, right up until the moment the ground gives way under him. And even then, God help him, he reaches for a reason to keep believing. 3 weeks later, a real estate agent phoned the front desk of that home and asked, in a pleasant, hurried voice, when I intended to vacate the ranch. The ranch. The one I had built with these two hands over 40 years, out of a busted homestead and a banknote and more stubbornness than sense. The one my children had, it turned out, already sold. I hadn't signed a thing. When I asked for a copy of the deed, when I finally got somebody to put the document itself in front of my eyes instead of a story in my ear, the answer was so simple it was almost funny. The land was still mine. The deed carried my name, and my name alone. They had forged a sale on ground that was never theirs to sell. Somewhere in a title company's file sat a signature that looked like mine and wasn't, over a promise no honest man had made. That afternoon, I checked myself out of that place. I signed my own name, my real one, the one my hand actually knows how to make, on the release form, and I drove the 41 miles to the county recorder's office with my knuckles white on the wheel. And I asked one clerk, a woman I'd known 30 years, to pull the record and read the owner's name out loud, in front of everyone standing in that little office. Out loud, so there could be no more whispering, no more "Dad's confused," no more stories. She read it, and the room went quiet. That's where this begins. But it is not where it ends, and if you'll stay with me, I'll tell you the whole of it. The part that broke my heart and the part that put it back together. Both. Because this is not only a story about a stolen ranch, it is a story about what people will do to the old and the trusting when they think no one is watching, and about the plain, patient way the truth has of climbing back up into the light no matter how deep you bury it. Where are you watching this from tonight? What town? What county? What country? Maybe you're at a kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside you. Maybe you're in a truck in a parking lot, or lying in a bed that isn't your own, in a place that smells of bleach and boiled vegetables. I know that smell now. I'll never forget it. Wherever you are, in whatever corner of this wide world, know that an old rancher from the high plains of Montana is talking to you tonight the way he'd talk to a neighbor across a fence line. Slow, straight, with nothing to sell you and nothing to hide. Before I go on, let me say one plain thing so there's no confusion. This is a story. I've changed the names, moved the fences, invented the town and the faces so that no living soul is pointed at. Any resemblance to a real person you know, or think you know, is the kind of coincidence that happens because this sort of thing happens, quietly, in good families, in nice towns, more often than any of us would like to admit. Take from it what's true, leave the rest. My name, the name I'll go by here, is Earl Mercer, 74 years old. The spring this happened, and every one of those years is written somewhere on me, in a knuckle that won't straighten or a knee that talks back before a storm. I've buried a wife and raised 2 children and pulled more calves in the cold than I could count if I sat here all night trying. I am not a clever man. I never was. But I know cattle, and I know weather, and I learned, slower than I should have, to know people. And I am about to tell you how I nearly lost everything to the 3 lessons I thought I'd already learned. Let me start where every true thing on that place started. Let me start with the land, and with Ruth. The ranch sits in a fold of the high plains north of a town I'll call Cedar Butte, in a county I'll call Rimrock, where the grass runs silver green in June and burns to gold by August, and the wind never truly stops, only pauses to gather itself. From the porch, you can see the Bull Mountains standing blue and low on the southern horizon, and between them and the house there is nothing but my grass, my fences, my cattle, and the thin, bright line of Ash Creek cutting through the flat where the cottonwoods grow. 40 years I looked at that view every morning of my life. I never once got tired of it. A man who tires of looking at his own land has stopped loving it, and a man who has stopped loving his land will lose it one way or another. That's the first thing I know. I did not inherit that place. I want to be clear about that, because it matters later when people started saying things. I bought it, or bought the right to break my back on it, from a bank that had taken it off a family who'd gone under in a dry cycle back before my time. 800 acres deeded and a lease on more, a house with a sagging roof, a barn that a stiff wind could have argued with, and a well that ran good, which was the only reason I signed. I was 34. I had a young wife, a second-hand truck, $400, and a note at the bank that made me sick to my stomach every time I thought about it. The banker, a decent man named Halverson, whose granddaughter you'll meet before this is through, looked at me over his glasses and said, "Earl, this is either the best day of your life or the worst, and neither of us will know which for about 20 years. He was wrong. It took closer to 30. We built it the only way anybody ever built anything worth having, one hard season at a time, robbing today to pay yesterday and praying tomorrow would be kind. I ran cattle, black baldies to start, then straight Angus when I learned better. I put up hay on the creek bottom, dug post holes until my hands were shaped like the handle of a shovel, strung wire, doctored calves at 3 in the morning in weather that would kill you if you sat down in it. I registered a brand, the Rocking M, an M with a little rocker under it, like a cradle, and I burned it into every hide and half the fence posts and the crossbeam over the barn door. And I'll tell you, there is a feeling a man gets the first time he sees his own mark on his own animal, on his own ground, that is very close to the feeling of holding your firstborn. It says, I was here. I made this. This is mine, and it answers to me. But the truth, the deepest truth of that place, is that I did not build it alone, and I never once pretended I did. I built it with Ruth. Ruth. I have to gather myself a little to talk about Ruth. She was a school teacher's daughter from over east, and she had a way of standing very still and looking at a thing, a horse, a hailstorm coming, a man selling something, until she understood it all the way to the bottom. I could read weather. Ruth could read people, and reading people is the harder and the more important skill, and if I'd only listened to her better, longer, I might have seen this whole business coming years before it did. She used to say, "Earl, cattle will tell you the truth because they've got no reason to lie. People will tell you the truth too, if you watch their hands instead of their mouth. The mouth is for lying, the hands forget to." She kept the books, every dollar in and every dollar out, in a ledger with a green cloth cover that she wrote in with a pencil she sharpened with a pocket knife, because she said a pen let you write things down before you'd thought them through. When the cattle market broke our hearts, Ruth found the $40 we didn't know we had. When we had a good year, and we had some good years, I won't pretend we didn't, she was the one who said, "We don't spend it, Earl, we plant it." And she meant the land, always the land, more grass, better bulls, a new stretch of pipe so the far pasture would water. That ledger balanced to the penny for 40 years, because Ruth would sit up past midnight over a nickel that didn't add up rather than let it go. "The books balance in the end," she'd say. "They always balance in the end. If they don't balance, it's because somebody's hiding something, and you'd best find out who. The books balance in the end. Hold on to that. I'll come back to it, because it turned out to be the truest thing anybody ever said to me, truer than she knew when she said it. We had 2 children on that place, a son we named Cole, and 3 years behind him, a daughter we named Nora. They were raised the way ranch kids are raised, half wild and half worked to the bone, driving the truck across the hayfield at 9 years old, with a block of wood wired to the gas pedal so their feet could reach, bottle-feeding bum calves in the mudroom, learning to shoot and to swim and to sit a horse and to be quiet when their mother was thinking. They were good children. I want you to hear me say that, because a lot of what comes after is ugly, and I won't have you thinking they were born the way they ended up. Nobody is. We are all of us made, slowly, by what we love and what we're afraid of, and the fear does the faster work. Cole was the golden one, if I'm honest, and I was not always honest with myself about it. He was quick where I was slow, easy where I was stiff, the kind of boy who could talk a fence post into buying a gate. Everybody loved Cole. His teachers loved him, the girls loved him, the old men at the sale barn loved him. I loved him so much it scared me sometimes, and I made the mistake a lot of hard fathers make with a soft, shining son. I gave him the smile and gave his sister the work, and I never noticed I was doing it until it was far too late to undo. Nora was Ruth all over again, still, watchful, stubborn as a winter, with those same eyes that saw through you. She could pull a calf by the time she was 12 and set a broken gate by 14, and she never once asked for a word of praise, which is exactly why I forgot to give it. She left at 18 and didn't look back, and I told myself it was because girls leave. That's the way of it. When the truth was she left because there was more room in that house for Cole's charm than for her quiet, and she knew it before I did. She went to college on her own dime, became a school teacher like her grandmother, married a good steady man named Paul, and settled 2 states away, in Denver. And we talked on the phone on birthdays and at Christmas, and not near enough in between. That distance, that ordinary, painless-seeming distance between a father and a daughter who love each other and don't say so, that distance became a weapon in this story. Somebody found it and put an edge on it. I'll get to that. Ruth died 4 springs ago. It was her heart, which surprised everybody, because we all thought Ruth's heart was the strongest thing on that ranch, and in a way it was, right up until it wasn't. She was there at breakfast and gone by supper, and I have thanked God every day since that she didn't suffer, and cursed him every night since that she didn't stay. I buried her on the hill east of the house, under the one big cottonwood that grows away from the creek, where you can see the whole place and the mountains beyond. I put up a stone, and I still go up there and talk to her, not out loud mostly, just in my chest. And I want to tell you something that a younger man would have been ashamed to admit. After Ruth died, I stopped watching people's hands. I only had it in me to watch the weather, and a man who's only watching the weather does not see the storm that walks right up onto his own porch and knocks. That was the opening they needed, a grieving old man alone on a valuable piece of ground who'd forgotten how to read the one animal more dangerous than any bull he ever raised. Cole came home more after his mother died. At the time it moved me. My grown son, driving up from the city most Sundays, sitting on the porch with me, asking about the cattle, asking about the mortgage that wasn't a mortgage anymore because I'd burned that note 30 years back and never borrowed against the place again. Ruth wouldn't have it, and after Ruth I wouldn't either. He'd walk the fence lines with me. He'd say, "Dad, you shouldn't be out here alone at your age." He'd say it gentle with his hand on my shoulder, and I heard a son who worried about his father. I did not hear a man taking inventory, because that's what it was. I know that now, the way you know a thing after it's cut you. Cole was not counting my heartbeats out of love. He was counting my acres. He was pricing my grass and my water and my creek bottom and my barn, and doing sums in his head that I couldn't have imagined, because the sums a desperate man does are past the imagining of an honest one. Cole was in trouble, deep, drowning, midnight trouble, and he'd been in it a while, and he hid it the way charming men hide everything, behind a good coat and a better story. He had gone into building, houses, then bigger things, developments, the kind of business that looks like a license to print money right up until the money quits and calls in every marker at once. He'd borrowed against borrowings. He'd taken partners he shouldn't have and made promises he couldn't keep. And, when the market turned the way markets turn on men who bet the roof, he found himself owing sums with a great many zeros to people who do not send a second notice. His house in the city, the big one, with the lawn I always thought looked lonesome, was mortgaged past its worth. His wife had stopped smiling in the Christmas photos 2 years before I noticed. And he had a son, my grandson. A boy I'll call Danny, 17 that year, who loved that ranch the way I loved it, and who was about to learn the worst thing a boy can learn about his own father. I didn't know any of this. That's the part that shames me. It was all there to be seen if I'd been watching hands instead of weather. But grief makes you selfish in a quiet way. It turns you inward, toward your own hole in the ground. And while I was down in mine, mourning Ruth, my son was up on the surface, measuring the dirt over my head. The first real move, the first thing I can point to and say, there, that's where it started, was so small and so reasonable that I helped him do it. That's the devil of this whole kind of crime, and I want you to mark it, because if you take one useful thing from an old man tonight, let it be this. It never starts with the theft. It starts with the help. It starts with a strong young hand reaching out to hold your weak old one. And by the time you understand the hand isn't holding you up, but holding you down, holding you still, you have already leaned your whole weight on it. "Dad," Cole said one Sunday, real casual, cleaning up the supper dishes I'd have left in the sink. "You're doing all this paperwork by hand still? The ranch stuff, the taxes, the accounts?" I said I was, same as always, same as Ruth taught me. He smiled that smile. "Let me take some of that off your plate. You built this thing. You shouldn't have to spend your evenings fighting with a checkbook. Let me set up the online banking, get the bills on auto pay, Put the ranch accounts where I can keep an eye on things and make sure nobody's taking advantage of you. There's a lot of scams out there aimed at folks your age. Let me protect you. Let me protect you. I have turned those 3 words over so many times, they've gone smooth as a creek stone. Let me protect you. The wolf does not come to the sheep and say, I am here to eat you. The wolf comes and says, the pasture is dangerous, and I will guard the gate. And the sheep, who is tired and old, and has lately buried the ewe he loved, says, thank you. Thank you, and God bless you, son. I gave him the passwords. I gave him the accounts. I let him take the ledger. Not Ruth's green ledger, I'd never have let that out of the house, but the working accounts, the operating money, the checkbook the ranch ran on. I told myself I was blessed to have a son who cared. And for a while, this is the cruelest part, for a while, it did feel like care. He paid the bills on time. He called to say the cattle check had come in. He noticed things. He was good at it. God, he was good at it. And every good thing he did built the story he needed the world to believe later, that Cole was the devoted son, minding the affairs of a father who could no longer mind his own. Meanwhile, the ground was being cut away beneath me an inch at a time, and I couldn't feel it, because a man standing on ground that's washing out from under him feels perfectly steady right up until he's falling. Nora would call now and then, and something in her voice would snag on something in mine, and she'd say, Dad, are you okay out there? Really okay? And I'd say I was fine, because I was a proud old fool, and because, I found this out later, Cole had gotten to her too, in his soft, careful way, dropping a word here and a worry there. He told her I was slipping. He told her I'd left the stove on, twice, though I never did. He told her I'd gotten lost driving home from the sale barn, a road I could drive blind. He told her, and here is the piece of it that I cannot forgive, even now that I've forgiven the rest. He told her that I didn't want to be a burden to her, that I'd said as much, that I'd asked him to handle things so she wouldn't have to worry, so that when the day came that I needed her, she would already have been taught, gently, patiently, for 2 years, that her father was fading and had chosen her brother to lean on. He built a wall between my daughter and me, brick by brick, and he built it so slow and so smooth that neither of us saw it going up. We just noticed one day that we couldn't reach each other anymore. That's how it's done, not with a lie you'd catch. With 100 small ones, you wouldn't, laid like courses of brick, until the wall is up, and the 2 people who would have protected each other are standing on opposite sides of it, each one thinking the other has drifted away. Then, that winter, I had a spell, and Cole had his door. I want to be careful telling this next part, because it's the part the other side leaned on hardest, and I've had it thrown in my face in a courtroom, so I've learned to tell it exact. That February I got dizzy feeding one morning, and I went down in the corral. Just went down, in the snow, among the cattle, and lay there a while with my heart going like a bird in a jar before I got my feet under me and got back to the house. It happened once more, a week later, in the kitchen. 2 spells. My blood pressure, it turned out, and a medication that needed adjusting, which a doctor fixed in about 10 minutes once I finally saw one. But that was later. At the time, 2 spells in a hard winter felt like a warning, and I was scared. And I'll admit that scared old man to you plainly because there's no shame in it. I called Cole. Of course I called Cole. He handled everything now. He came the same day. He was wonderful. I want you to understand that even now, even knowing what I know, I remember how wonderful he was that day, and it still catches in my throat. He drove me to the clinic. He sat with me. He asked the nurse good questions. He held my arm on the ice. And on the way home, he said, gentle as anything, Dad, I've been thinking, you had a scare. What if that happens when nobody's around, out here, in this cold 40 minutes from town? You could lie in that corral till you froze, and no one would know for days. And that was true. That was a true and frightening thing, and he knew it was, and he used it like a good knife, which is to say cleanly, so I barely felt it go in. There's a place in town, he said. Cedar View. It's real nice, Dad, not like you're thinking. It's just for a while. Just until we get your medication sorted out and you're steady on your feet again. You'll have people around, 3 meals, a nurse right there. You'll be back home by spring, back for calving, I promise. I can't lose you the way we lost Mom all of a sudden, out of nowhere. Let me do this. Let me protect you. Let me protect you. There it was again, the same 3 words, and I was too frightened and too grieved and too grateful to hear that they'd become a spell he was saying over me. The way you gentle a horse into a chute it doesn't want to enter. Easy now, easy, this is for your own good. And the horse, who trusts the hand, walks in. And the gate swings shut behind him. I walked in. God help me, I packed a bag and I walked in. And the gate swung shut. Cedar View was clean, I'll give it that. Clean and warm and full of a smell I described to you already. And quiet with the particular quiet of a place where people are waiting, though nobody says for what. They were kind, most of them, in the tired way of people who are underpaid to be kind. There was a common room with a television always on too loud, and a fish tank and a rack of magazines from 3 years back. There was a schedule on the wall, bingo on Tuesdays. A man came with a guitar on Thursdays and sang songs from before even my time. And there were the others, the residents, my new neighbors. And I want to say a word about them, because they broke my heart in a way that's important to what happened. They were not, most of them, out of their minds. That's the lie the young tell themselves about a place like that, so they can leave their people there and drive home light. Most of the folks at Cedar View had their minds just fine. What they'd lost was their standing, their say. Somewhere along the line, a decision had been made about each of them, by a son, a daughter, a doctor, a court, that they were no longer the authors of their own days. And once that decision is made, it is very, very hard to unmake. Because the moment you object, the objection itself is taken as proof. You say, I don't belong here, I'm fine, take me home. And they write in the chart that you're agitated, that you're in denial, that you don't understand your situation. Your sanity becomes the symptom. Your fight becomes the diagnosis. I watched it happen to a retired railroad man named Walt, who only wanted to go sit on his own front step one more time, and I swore an oath to Ruth's memory, lying awake that first week, that it would not happen to me. I did not yet know how close it would come. There was one soul in that place who saw me, a night aide I'll call Beatrice, a big, slow-moving woman with a voice like a warm hand, who'd worked nights at Cedar View for 19 years because the nights were quiet and she could sit with the ones who couldn't sleep. She found me awake at 2 a.m, my 4th night, sitting up in the dark, and instead of telling me to lie down, she pulled up a chair and asked me about the ranch. Just asked, the way Ruth used to ask, and listened the way Ruth used to listen. And I talked for an hour about grass and calves and a woman buried under a cottonwood, and something in me that had been holding its breath for 3 weeks let a little of it out. Mr. Mercer, B said when I finally wound down, can I say something and you won't take it wrong? I said she could. She looked at me a long moment in the low light. You don't belong here, she said. I've been doing this 19 years. I know the ones who belong here and the ones who got put here. You got put here, and I don't know your family's business and it ain't mine to know. But you keep your eyes open, you hear? A man gets put somewhere. Usually it's because he was in the way of something. You just keep your eyes open. I've thanked God for B more times than I can count. Because 3 days after she said that, the telephone at the front desk rang, and a bright, hurried voice on the other end asked the girl at the desk when Mr. Mercer would be vacating the ranch property so the new owners could take possession. And B was standing right there, and B did not let it go. Here is how I heard about it, because I did not take the call myself. B came and got me. She didn't say much, just, Mr. Mercer, there's a phone call I think you'd better know about. And there was something in her face that made me get up faster than my knees liked. By the time we got to the front desk, the caller had already been passed along, and the girl there, a nice enough young thing, overwhelmed most days, had a sticky note in her hand and a confused look on her face. She said a real estate agent had called, a Mr. Doyle from a firm in the city. He'd wanted to confirm the move-out timeline for the Mercer property out on Ash Creek Road on account of the sale had closed or was closing, and the buyers were eager to get in before spring, and could the facility help coordinate Mr. Mercer's transition, since he was a resident there now. I stood at that desk, and I felt the floor of the world drop about a foot. The sale had closed. My ranch, on account of the sale, had closed. There's no sale, I said. I remember my voice sounded strange to me, thin and far away. There's no sale. I own that ranch. I built that ranch. I didn't sell anything. I'd never sell it. I want the number. Give me the number he called from. The girl looked at B, and B nodded, and the girl gave me the number, and I called it standing right there with everybody in the common room, pretending not to listen, and a smooth, pleasant man answered, "This is Kip Doyle," and I said, "This is Earl Mercer, and I'd like to know what in the hell you're talking about. A sale on my ranch." And there was a silence on that line about 3 seconds long that told me more than anything he said after. 3 seconds, a guilty man's pause, while he decides which story to reach for. Then Doyle got very smooth again and said, "Oh, there must be some confusion. He'd been dealing with the family, with my son. Everything had been handled through my son, who had power of attorney, who was the seller of record. The paperwork was all in order. Perhaps I should speak with my son. He was sorry for any mix-up. And he had another call, and he was gone. Handled through my son, power of attorney, seller of record. I had never signed a power of attorney in my life, not one. I had let coal into the checking account, God forgive me. But I had never given any man on this earth the right to sell my land. And if you'd asked me the day before whether such a thing could even be done to a man without his knowing, I'd have laughed at you. That's not how it works, I'd have said. That's not America. A man can't sell your house out from under you. There's records. There's law. There's a deed with your name on it. There's a deed with your name on it. That thought, which came to me standing at that front desk with the fish tank burbling and a game show laughing on the television, that thought was the first solid thing I'd touched in 3 weeks. It was Ruth's voice, or near enough. The books balance in the end. If they don't balance, somebody's hiding something, and you'd best find out who. I did not fully understand yet what had been done to me, but I understood, all at once and down to the ground, that whatever story anyone was telling, there was a piece of paper somewhere with the truth written on it in ink that no smile could smudge. And I understood that I had to go find that paper and hold it in my own hands and make somebody read it out loud. I want to stop here a minute. I want to talk to you, whoever you are, wherever you're sitting, because I know some of you are listening to this and it's landing too close. Maybe it's happening to you right now. The helpful hand, the accounts you signed over, the child who's suddenly so worried about you, the papers you don't quite understand that they keep sliding across the table. Maybe it already happened years ago, and you never told a soul because you were ashamed, the way I was ashamed, the way we are all taught to be ashamed of being fooled, as though the fault were in the one who trusted and not in the one who betrayed. I want you to hear an old man say this, plain. It is not your shame. It was never your shame. The shame belongs entirely and only to the one who looked at your open, trusting face and decided to lie to it. Trust is not a weakness. Trust is the finest thing we make. We people, and the ones who exploit it, are stealing something far more valuable than land. I'm still here. Stay with me. This is the low part of the story, and I won't lie to you and skip over it, because if I skip it, then somebody out there who's living in the low part right now will think they're alone in it, and they are not. Those next few nights at Cedar View were the darkest of my life, and I have had some dark ones. I lay in that narrow bed in that clean, warm room that was not my home, and I did the arithmetic of an old man who believes he has lost everything. I thought, the ranch is gone. My son did it. My daughter is 1,000 miles away and thinks I'm losing my mind. Ruth is under the cottonwood and can't help me. And I am 74 years old, locked in a place I can't leave, with a story pinned to me that says I'm not fit to decide my own supper, let alone fight a thing like this. I thought about all the years, all the post holes, all the 3 a.m. calvings, all of it, going to some developer's bulldozer so my son could pay a debt I didn't even know he had. And I felt the bottom of it, at that place where a man stops being angry and just goes quiet and gray inside, where the fight runs out of him and something worse moves in. I felt the pull of just lying down in it, just letting them win, just being the old fool they had already decided I was, and closing my eyes, and being done. I am telling you about that place because I got out of it, and I want you to know it can be gotten out of. What got me out was small. It's always small. Around 3 a.m. of the worst night, B came in on her rounds and saw I was awake and gray. And she didn't say anything cheerful, which I was grateful for. She just sat down in the chair, and after a while she said, "My grandmother used to say the night's the same length for everybody, rich or poor, guilty or innocent. But the morning ain't. The morning belongs to whoever's still standing to see it." And then she said, "You've got grass to see about, Mr. Mercer. Come the morning." And she got up and went on with her rounds. Come the morning. You've got grass to see about. And underneath B's voice I heard Ruth's, clear as if she were sitting on the edge of that bed. "Earl Mercer, the book's balance in the end. Go find the paper." And I heard, this will sound foolish to some of you, and I don't care. I heard something older and larger than either of them, the thing I'd been taught to call God on my knees as a boy, and had mostly stopped talking to since Ruth died, and it didn't say anything in words. It just steadied me, the way a hand on the withers steadies a spooked horse. Easy now, easy, not that way, this way. And the gray lifted just enough to get my feet on the cold floor when the window went from black to gray to the first hard gold of a plains morning. That morning, I checked myself out, and the fight began. Checking yourself out of a place like Cedar View is easier and harder than you'd think. Easier, because I had walked in of my own free will, and no court had ever said I couldn't walk out. That mattered enormously, it turned out. And I'll come back to why. Harder, because the whole machinery of the place is built to gently discourage it. The nurse on duty that morning, a decent, careful woman, told me I really ought to wait and discuss it with my son, that my son had made the arrangements, that leaving against advice would be noted. Everything was my son, and I understood, standing there in my own coat with my own bag, that if I let one more decision about my life route itself through coal, I was finished. So I stood up straight, straighter than my back wanted, and I said, in the voice I used to use on a green horse or a slick cattle buyer, the voice that does not argue because it has already decided, "Ma'am, I came in here on my own 2 feet and I'm leaving on them. I'd like the form, and I'll sign it with my own name, which I'd ask you to note is a name I still know how to write." There is a particular power in signing your own name when someone has been forging it. I didn't know yet that mine had been forged, not for certain, but I suspected. And so, when they slid that release form across the desk, I took my time. I made every letter. Earl Mercer. The way my hand makes it, with the little hook on the E that Ruth used to tease me about, the loop on the M that's a shade too big, my signature, mine. And I thought, whoever wrote my name on a deed didn't have this hand. Somewhere out there is a piece of paper pretending to be me, and it doesn't have this hand, and that's the crack I'm going to drive a wedge into. Then I walked out into the cold, bright morning, and B walked me to my truck, my old truck, which Colehead had brought to town so it wouldn't sit, which I now understood meant so I wouldn't have wheels, except nobody thought to take the key off my ring. And B put her big warm hand on my shoulder and said, "Go on now, go get your grass." And I got in, and the engine caught on the second try, the way it always does in the cold, and I drove, 41 miles from Cedar View to the county seat. I know that road the way I know my own hands. But I drove it that morning like a young man, both hands on the wheel, heart going, seeing everything sharp and new the way you do when you've decided something. The frost on the fence wire, a hawk on a post, my own breath. And somewhere around the halfway mark, coming over the rise where you first see the grain elevator and the courthouse dome, I started, of all things, to laugh. Not a happy laugh exactly, but there was something so clean about it, after 3 weeks of fog and fear, to be driving toward a plain, hard fact. They could tell all the stories they wanted. I was going to go read the fact. The county recorder's office is on the first floor of the courthouse, a squat sandstone building older than the state, and I have been in and out of it 100 times over 40 years, recording my brand, paying my taxes, filing this and that. And behind the long oak counter, that morning, as most mornings for 30 years, stood a woman I'll call June Halverson, granddaughter of the very banker who'd sold me the place, and told me I'd never know for 20 years whether it was the best day of my life or the worst. She'd been a girl when I signed that note. Now she had gray in her hair and reading glasses on a chain, and she'd recorded half the documents in that county. And when I came through the door, looking the way I must have looked, she came to the counter and said, "Earl Mercer. Lord Earl, we heard you were poorly. We heard you'd gone into Cedar View." "You heard right," I said. "I'm out now. June, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it in front of these folks." There were maybe 5, 6 other people in the office that morning, a young couple filing something, a title clerk from one of the companies, an old boy paying taxes, 2 women I didn't know. I raised my voice just enough. "I need you to pull the deed on my place, the Mercer Ranch, out on Ash Creek. 800 deeded acres, section and townships on file. And I need you to look at the record and tell me, out loud, right now, who owns that land? Who's the owner of record? Say the name out loud." June looked at me a second. She was sharp, June, sharp as her grandfather. And I watched her understand that something was wrong and something else in her. The thing that makes a good public servant decide that whatever this was the record, and the record could be read out loud to any citizen who asked, because that's what it's for. That's the whole entire point of it. A public record is the memory of a free people, kept in ink so that no man's word can be worth more than another man's word, so that the truth about who owns what does not depend on who's charming and who's grieving and who's got the best story. It sat in that book precisely so that on a morning like this one, an old man could walk in off the road and make it speak. She went to the terminal, she typed, she pulled the plat, then the deed history, and I watched her scroll, and I watched her frown, and I watched her scroll back up. And then she looked at me over the reading glasses and she said, "Earl, hang on." And she pulled a second document, and her frown got deeper. And the office had gone quiet the way a room does when everybody can feel something without knowing what. "Read me the owner of record, June," I said. "Just that. Who owns it?" She put her finger on the line, and she read it out, clear in that stone room with the morning light coming in the tall windows. "Owner of record, Earl J. Mercer, sole owner, warranty deed, recorded," and she read the date 38 years back, when Ruth and I finally paid that banker off and took the free and clear title. "No subsequent conveyance of record except," and here her voice changed, went careful, "except a quitclaim deed recorded 3 weeks ago, from Earl J. Mercer to a Cole R. Mercer, and then a warranty deed from Cole R. Mercer to Ash Creek Holdings, pending." She looked up. "Earl, did you sign a quitclaim deed to your son 3 weeks ago?" "June," I said, and I heard my own voice come out steady and terrible in that quiet room. "3 weeks ago, I was locked in Cedar View. I have witnesses to every day of it. I never signed a thing. I never gave my son my land. That signature is a forgery, and I'll swear it on my wife's grave and my own life both." And June Halverson, granddaughter of an honest banker, took off her reading glasses and set them down on the oak counter, and said the words that turned this whole thing from a nightmare into a fight I could win. "Then, Earl, somebody has committed a crime in this office, and it's all still here. It's all in the record. Nobody can unwrite it. Come around behind the counter and sit down, and don't touch anything, and let me make some phone calls." June's phone calls started the machinery, and I want to slow down here and tell you how it actually worked, in plain words, because I think a lot of folks are afraid of this the way I was afraid of it. They think the law is a fog you can't fight through, that the crooks understand it and you never will, that it's all too complicated for an ordinary person. It isn't. The bones of it are simple, and the simple bones of it are on your side, if you're the honest one, more than you'd ever dare to hope. Here is the simple bone of my case, the one everything else hung from. You cannot sell what you do not own, and my son never owned my ranch. That's it. That's the whole spine of it. Cole had made a piece of paper, a quitclaim deed, that said I gave him the ranch. Then he'd made another piece of paper selling it to a holding company. But the first piece of paper was a lie, a forgery. And a forged deed is not a weak deed or a questionable deed. In the eyes of the law, it is nothing at all. It never happened. A forged signature conveys exactly zero, because I never signed, and so Cole never owned so much as a blade of my grass, and so he had nothing to sell, and so the sale to Ash Creek Holdings was a sale of thin air. The whole tower he'd built stood on that first forged stone, and the moment you pulled that stone, the whole thing was already fallen. It just didn't know it yet. The reason it hadn't collapsed on its own is a thing worth understanding too. When you buy a piece of property the honest way, the buyer's people do a title search. They go read the exact record June read to me to make sure the seller really owns the thing and can really sell it. And a real title company, doing its job, would have looked at my chain of title and seen a quitclaim deed from an old man to his son recorded 3 weeks ago, right before a quick flip to a holding company, right while the old man happened to be in a nursing home. And any honest title examiner in the country would have stopped cold and started asking questions. That's the system working. That's the fences the honest people built over the years to catch exactly this. What Cole had needed to get past those fences was speed and quiet and a buyer who wasn't looking too hard. A holding company that turned out to be half his own, more or less, a vehicle to move the ranch and borrow against it fast before anyone thought to ask the old man. He was racing the fences. He almost made it. He'd have made it, I think, if not for one aide who wouldn't let a phone call go, and one clerk who'd read a record out loud to any citizen who asked. I did not know all of this that first morning, sitting behind June's counter with a paper cup of bad courthouse coffee shaking a little in my hand. What I knew that morning was that I needed a lawyer, and June knew exactly which one. Deb Hollis, she said, writing a name and number on a card. Elder law. She's about 5'0", and she'll take the hide off anybody who deserves it. She grew up on a place like yours, over east, before the bank took it. She does not care for people who steal from old folks. Go see her. Today. Don't wait, Earl. And Earl. She caught my eye. Don't call your son. Not yet. Don't warn him. Let the record be the record, and let the people whose job this is do their jobs. You understand me? I understood her. It cost me something, that instruction. And I'll be honest about the cost. Because even then, even standing in that courthouse with the proof in the book that my boy had forged my name to steal my land, some fool part of me, some father part of me, that will apparently go to the grave with me, wanted to call Cole and give him a chance to explain, wanted there to be an explanation, wanted him to say, Dad, it's not what it looks like, and have it be true. That wanting is the softest, dearest, most dangerous thing in a parent, and the people who prey on the old know all about it, count on it, farm it. Deb Hollis said something to me later that I've never forgotten. She said, Earl, they don't just steal your money. They steal your love and use it as the crowbar. The love is the tool. That's the part that ought to make a jury weep, and sometimes does. Deb Hollis's office was 2 rooms over a hardware store, and June was right about the 5'0", and June was right about the rest of it too. She sat me down, she poured me a real cup of coffee out of a real pot, and she listened to the whole thing. Cedar View, the accounts, the phone call, the drive, the deed, without once interrupting, taking notes in a fast, tight hand, and when I was done, she took off her glasses, and there were, I swear it, tears standing in that tough little woman's eyes, and she said, All right, Earl, all right. Here's what I want you to understand before we do one other thing. You are not confused. You are not too old. You did not lose your ranch. You are the legal owner of your ranch, this morning, right now, exactly as you were 40 years ago. And the piece of paper that says otherwise is a crime somebody committed against you. And we are going to prove it, and we are going to unrecord it. And if the county attorney has the spine God gave a goose, somebody is going to prison for it, now. The hardest thing I have to tell you is who. I know who, I said. I know you know, she said, gentle for the first time. I'm sorry, Earl. I'm so sorry. But I have to say it out loud, because the whole case turns on it, and you're going to have to be able to say it out loud too, in front of strangers, more than once. It was your son. Cole did this. And before we're through, you're going to have to look at him across a courtroom and tell the truth about your own boy. And that is going to be the hardest thing you have ever done. Harder than any calving night, harder than burying your wife. And you're going to do it anyway. Because if you don't, he does it to the next old man. They always do it to the next one. Yours is never the only one. Do you hear me? Yours is never the only one. I heard her. I didn't know yet how right she was. I didn't know yet about Hazel, up Ash Creek, whose turn was coming. But I heard the truth in it, the terrible arithmetic of it. And I said, I hear you. What do we do first? First, Deb said, already reaching for the phone. We make sure that sale can't close while we sleep. We file to stop it today, and we put the whole world on notice that the title's in dispute. Then we go to the sheriff, because forging a deed and recording it is a felony 3 ways from Sunday, and elder exploitation on top. Then, Earl, and here she almost smiled, then we go get your ranch back, 1 true piece of paper at a time. You beat him with paper, you understand? Not with a shotgun, not with your fists, not with a phone call in the night. With paper. The truth on paper, filed and stamped and dated. In that same record where he told his lie. His lie and your truth are going to sit in the same book forever, and yours is going to be the one that stands. That's how a decent country is supposed to work, and today it's going to work for you. I want to tell you about going home, because before the fight got ugly, there was 1 clean hour, and a man should hold on to his clean hours. Deb filed her papers that afternoon, a notice that froze the sale, a formal dispute of the title, so that the whole world of buyers and lenders and title companies would see, if they looked, that this ground was contested and no honest soul had better touch it. And then she said, Go home, Earl, It's your house. Nobody's got the right to keep you out of it. Go home and sleep in your own bed, and I'll call you in the morning." And I drove out Ash Creek Road as the sun was going down red behind the bulls, and I turned in under the crossbeam with the rocking M burned into it, and I stopped the truck in the yard, and I just sat there a while and looked at it. The house Ruth and I fixed, the barn I raised, the hill with the cottonwood where she lies, mine, still mine. The deed still had my name on it. I went in, and the house was cold and dusty and exactly as I'd left it, and I built a fire in the wood stove, and I stood in my own kitchen, and I cried like a child, from relief and from grief both. And then I made myself a plate of eggs because a man's got to eat, and I slept 10 hours in my own bed under Ruth's quilt, and it was the best sleep I'd had since February. The peace lasted about a day and a half. Then Cole came. He came the way he always came, easy, smiling, pulling up in that big, clean city truck that had never once had a bale of hay in the bed. And he came up the porch steps calling, "Dad," like it was any Sunday, like the world hadn't cracked open. And for just a second, I'm ashamed of it, but I'll tell you, for just a second, my old heart lifted at the sight of my boy before my head caught up. That's the thing they count on, even now, even knowing. The blood pulls before the brain can stop it. But I'd had my clean hour and my 10 hours of sleep, and I'd sat across from Deb Hollis, and I was not the fogged, grieving, grateful old man he'd left in Cedar View. I was Earl Mercer, standing in my own doorway on my own ground, and I did not open the screen door. "Cole," I said. He stopped on the top step. Something in my voice, or in my not opening the door, told him. I watched it happen, watched the smile stay on his mouth a second after it left his eyes, the way a light stays on a hilltop a second after the sun's gone down behind it. And then he did the thing that I think of everything hurt me the worst. Worse than the forgery, worse than Cedar View. He didn't fall to his knees and beg my forgiveness. He didn't break down. He tried to sell me the story anyway, even then, even caught. He looked me in the eye, my own son, and he tried to charm his way across the truth like it was one more fence to talk over. "Dad, okay, I can see somebody's been filling your head. Let me guess, the courthouse? Some clerk got you all worked up? Dad, listen to me. Listen, I did what I did to protect this place. You're not... Dad, you had 2 spells. You went down in the corral. You could have died out here alone. This ranch is worth more than you can run anymore. And there's people. There's real money interested. And I set it up so we could keep it in the family, structure it right, get you taken care of for the rest of your life, someplace safe, someplace nice. And instead of thanking me, you go running to a lawyer? Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you know what I owe? Do you have any idea the hole I'm in? I did this for us, for the family, for Danny. Someday this'd all be his anyway. I moved it up, that's all. I moved up what was already going to happen. You're going to blow up the whole thing over a technicality, over a signature, when I was trying to save us all. I let him talk. I let him talk himself all the way out, the way you let a green horse buck itself tired. And when he finally stopped, breathing hard, I said the only thing there was to say. "You forged my name, Cole. Dad, you forged my name. On my land. While I was locked up in a home, you locked me in. You wrote Earl Mercer on a paper giving away the ranch your mother and I bled 40 years into, and you signed it in a hand that wasn't mine, and you had it notarized somehow, and you filed it in the county record, which is a crime, son, a felony, and you did it to pay a debt you never once told me about. And you were going to let me die in that place thinking my mind was going and never know the ranch was gone." My voice never rose. I've thought about that since. It never once rose. There's no story that fixes that. There's no version where that was for me. You keep saying you did it for the family, but you did it to the family. You did it to me, and I'm your father, and I love you, and I'm not going to hate you because your mother would come up out of that hill and skin me if I let this turn me into a hater. But I am going to stop you, because Deb Hollis is right, and your grandmother was right, and it's the truest thing I know now. It's never just the one. You'd have done it again. You'd do it to some other old fool tomorrow if you thought you could. And I am not going to let you, not because you're my enemy, but because you're my son. And stopping you is the last true fatherly thing left that I can do for you. Now, get off my porch, not off my land. You're my boy. You can grieve on this land when the time comes like anybody. But get off my porch, because I can't look at you right now without seeing your mother's face. and it's breaking something in me that I need whole for what's coming." He stood there a long moment, and I saw, just for a flash before he shut it down, I saw the boy in there, the real Cole, the one who used to fall asleep in the truck with his head on Ruth's arm, coming home from the sale barn. He was in there, way down, under all the debt and the fear and the lies he had told himself, until he believed them. And that flash of the real boy is the thing that let me keep loving him through everything that came after. And it's the thing I want you to hold on to if you're going through this yourself, because you'll need it. The ones who hurt us were somebody's sleeping child once. That doesn't excuse a thing they did, but it's why we don't have to become them to beat them. Then the shutter came down over his face again, and he said, low and ugly, in a voice I'd never heard from him, "You'll lose. You're an old man, and everybody knows it. By the time this is over, they'll believe you gave it to me. I'll make sure they believe it." And he turned and went down the steps and got in his clean truck and drove off. And I stood in my doorway and watched the dust hang gold in the last of the light. And I said out loud, to Ruth, to God, to the empty porch, "Well, now I know exactly who I'm fighting." And strangely, God help me, I felt better, because a straight fight against a thing you can see is a mercy compared to drowning, slow in a fog of kindness. I called Nora that night. Deb had said, "Don't warn Cole," and I hadn't. Cole warned himself, showing up like that. But she'd said nothing about my daughter, and I'd been a coward about Nora long enough. It was the hardest phone call of my life, harder than calling the funeral home about Ruth, because with Ruth, there was nothing left to lose, and with Nora, there was everything. She answered on the fourth ring, wary, the way you answer when your father calls at night and never does. "Dad, is everything okay?" And I found I couldn't do it smooth. I just said, "Nora, honey, I need to tell you some things, and I need you to hear all of them before you say anything. And some of them are going to be hard to believe because your brother's spent 2 years making them hard to believe. And I let him, and that's my fault, and I'm sorry. Can you hear me out?" There was a silence. Then, in a small voice I hadn't heard from my grown daughter in 20 years, she said, "Okay, Daddy." So I told her, all of it. Cedar View, the accounts, the phone call, the forged deed with my name in a hand that wasn't mine. And as I talked, I heard her breathing change, heard her start to cry, and when I got to the part about Cole telling her I was slipping, telling her I'd left the stove on, telling her I didn't want to be a burden to her, telling her I'd chosen him to lean on so she wouldn't have to worry. When I got to that part, my daughter made a sound I will hear until I die. A sound of a wall coming down, because she'd believed it. Believed. Of course she'd believed it. It came from her brother, who loved her, who wouldn't lie about their own father. And it was said with such worry, such tenderness, such reluctance over 2 long years, and it explained the strange new distance she'd felt from me, and it let her off the hook of guilt for not being there, and every good and reasonable thing in her had been used against her, the same as every good and reasonable thing in me had been used against me. We were both of us robbed the same night, by the same hand, of the same thing. Not land. Land is nothing next to this. We were robbed of each other. For 2 years my daughter thought her father was fading, and chose her brother, and I thought my daughter had drifted off into her own life, and didn't need her old man, and the whole time we were both being lied to by the one person we'd both have believed. "Daddy," she said when she could talk, "he told me you didn't want to see me. He told me you said it upset you having me around, that it reminded you of Mom. He told me the best thing I could do was give you space and let him handle things. I stopped calling as much because he told me it was better for you." Oh, God, Daddy, I'm so sorry, "No," I said, hard, because I could not let her carry 1 ounce of it. "No, you listen to me, Nora Ruth Mercer. You did not do one wrong thing, not one. You loved your brother and trusted him because he gave you no reason not to, and that is not a flaw in you. That is the best thing in you, and I will not have you turning it into a sin. The blame is on the one who lied, only on him. Do you hear your mother in that? Because that's your mother talking through me right now, and you know she's right." And I heard Nora almost laugh through the crying because she did hear her mother in it, and that broke the worst of it. She was on a plane the next morning. She left her husband to mind the kids in her school to find a substitute, and she flew into the little regional airport 2 hours from Cedar Butte and rented a car and drove straight to the ranch. And when she came through that door, my Nora, 43 years old, in her sensible teacher clothes, with Ruth's exact eyes. She crossed the kitchen and put her arms around me, and neither of us said anything for a long, long time. And then she stepped back and wiped her face. And I watched the still, watchful, stubborn as winter girl I'd raised turn into something I'd honestly never seen, because I'd never given her cause to become it. I watched her jaw set. I watched those Ruth eyes go cold and bright and absolutely level. "Okay," my daughter said. "Where's this lawyer? Where's these papers? Show me everything. He is not going to get away with this. He put you in a home and forged your name, and he tried to make me an accomplice by making me disbelieve my own father. And I am going to be there for every single day of this, Dad. Every day. He isn't going to look across that courtroom and see a confused old man alone. He's going to look across it and see us." Deb Hollis, when she met Nora, looked at her about 2 seconds and said, "Oh, good, you brought reinforcements." And the two of them took to each other like fire to dry grass. And I'll tell you, watching my quiet daughter and that fierce little lawyer sit down at Ruth's kitchen table and start laying out documents in neat rows, drinking coffee at midnight, and building the thing that was going to save the ranch, I felt Ruth so close in that room I could have turned my head and seen her. The books balance in the end. She used to sit at that same table with that same look, chasing a nickel that didn't add up because somebody was hiding something. And now, here was her daughter, with her eyes and her stillness and her patience, doing the same holy arithmetic. Except the thing that didn't add up this time was a whole ranch, and the somebody hiding it was her own brother, and she was going to find every penny of the truth if it took her the rest of her life. It didn't take the rest of her life. It took about 6 weeks, but those 6 weeks are the heart of how you actually beat a thing like this. And I'm going to walk you through them, because I promised you I wouldn't just tell you it turned out all right. I'm going to tell you how. There was one more person I had to reckon with before I could think about the law, and he was the one I dreaded most, because he was 17 years old and he was Cole's son. And whatever happened to Cole was going to fall on him like a barn roof. My grandson, Danny. Danny had spent every summer of his life on that ranch. From the time he could walk, Ruth and I had him June through August, and he took to it the way his father never quite had, and his aunt always had. He loved the work, the early mornings, the animals, the sheer, hard, honest realness of it. And he was good, a natural, with quiet hands and a feel for stock you can't teach. He was going to be a rancher. He'd told me so at 10, standing on the bottom rail of the corral, dead serious. "Grandpa, when I grow up, I'm going to run this place with you." And I'd said, "You'll run it long after me, son," and meant it. And it was the closest thing I had to a plan for the future of the ground I'd bled into. That it would go to this boy who loved it, this boy who was Ruth and me, and even the best of Cole all mixed together. Danny was my hope, and now his father had tried to sell his inheritance to pay a debt, and had done it with a forgery that was going to send that father to prison, and I did not know how to face him. He faced me first. He showed up at the ranch 3 days after Nora came, having driven 4 hours in a car with a taillight held on with tape, having told his mother he was going to a friend's, and he stood in the yard white and shaking, and he said, "Grandpa, I heard them fighting, Mom and Dad. I heard, is it true? Did Dad try to sell the ranch? Did he forge your name? Did he put you in a home?" And I looked at that boy, at the wreck of him, at the man he was about to be forced to become years too early, and I did the only thing there was to do. I told him the truth, because he'd already been lied to enough by the people who were supposed to protect him, and I was not going to be one more. "Yes, son," I said, "it's true, all of it." And Danny, my Danny, sat down right there in the dirt of the yard and put his face in his hands and cried the way a boy cries when his father dies, because in a way, one had. And I got down there in the dirt with him, old knees and all, and I put my arm around him and I let him cry. And when he could hear me, I said the most important thing I have ever said to another human being, and I'm going to say it to you too, because somewhere out there is a young person carrying the shame of what an older person they loved did wrong, and they need to hear it. Daniel, look at me. What your father did is not what you are. Do you understand me? A man is not his father's sins any more than he's his father's saddle. You get to decide who you are. You've always gotten to decide. Your dad decided, somewhere along the way, in the dark, alone, afraid, to become a man who'd steal from his own father. And I grieve that. I'll grieve it the rest of my life. But you are not him. The blood doesn't decide it. You decide it every day with your own two hands, the same as I built this place with mine. And I'll tell you what I see when I look at you. I see a boy who drove 4 hours on a taped-up taillight to find out the truth and stand in it, when it would have been 1,000 times easier to stay home and believe a comfortable lie. That's not your father's boy, that's your grandmother's boy, and mine, and you're going to be all right. We're all going to be all right. Now get up out of this dirt and come inside, because your Aunt Nora's here, and she's been asking for you. And there's a plate of food with your name on it, and there's grass to see about in the morning. Danny stayed. He called his mother and told her where he really was, and, God bless her, she let him stay, because she understood what I understood. That boy needed to be on the right side of this, needed to be able to look back someday and know that when it counted he stood with the truth and not with the lie, even when the lie was his own father. He worked the ranch beside me those 6 weeks, and in the evenings he sat at Ruth's table with Nora and Deb, and, though he was just a kid, he helped, and one thing he helped with turned out to matter more than anybody guessed. Because Danny, it turned out, knew things. Kids see everything. Nobody watches them watching. And Danny had seen his father, back in the winter, at the big house in the city, with a man Danny didn't know, at the kitchen table late. And there'd been papers, and his father had practiced something over and over on a legal pad, and then torn the pages off and burned them in the sink. And Danny hadn't understood it then, but he understood it now. He'd been practicing my signature. That's the kind of thing that wins cases. Not lawyer cleverness, a boy who tells the truth about what he saw. The law came in the shape of a man I'll call Detective Ray Sandoval out of the sheriff's office, a heavy-set, quiet fellow who'd spent 15 years working financial crimes in a rural county, which mostly meant watching the old get robbed by the young and rarely being able to prove it, and who took my case like a man who'd been waiting a long time for one he could actually nail. He came out to the ranch. He sat at Ruth's table. And he explained to me, patient, how these things get proven. And it was a revelation to me, because I'd thought it'd be my word against Cole's, the old man against the charming son, and I'd been afraid of that fight. But Sandoval said, Mr. Mercer, that's the beautiful thing about a forgery. A forger has to leave tracks in the exact places that are hardest to erase, because they're official. He didn't just tell a lie, he wrote it down and filed it with the government. And now, every place he wrote it down is a place we can catch him. Here is how they caught my son, in plain order. So you'll know it can be done. They caught him with the date. The forged quitclaim deed said, I signed it, before a notary, on a certain day in a certain week. And on that day, I was locked in Cedar View. And Cedar View keeps records, a sign-in log, and a medication log, and a nurse's chart, and a hallway camera, all of which put me 41 miles from where that deed says I stood signing it. A man cannot be in two places. The record they used to seem to prove I gave it away became the record that proved I couldn't have. They caught him with the notary. Every notary keeps a journal. The law makes them. A book where they log every signature they witness, who it was, what identification, a thumbprint sometimes. Sandoval pulled that journal, and the notary, a young fellow just starting out and over his head, who I'll say more about. His journal had an entry for that deed, but it was thin and wrong, and when Sandoval leaned on it, it came apart, because the notary had not actually watched Earl Mercer sign anything, because Earl Mercer had been in a nursing home, and the young notary had let Cole bring him a paper. His father had already signed at home, and had stamped it as a favor, as a shortcut, as a small dishonest thing that he told himself wasn't really a crime. And that shortcut hung him, and taught him, I hope, the lesson every one of us has to learn. There are no small dishonest things. They're all doors, and something always walks through. And they caught him with the handwriting, because a forged signature is a copy, and a copy is never the thing. And the state has people who do nothing all day, but lay a true signature beside a false one, and show a jury the little tremors and hesitations, where the false hand slowed down to remember how the true hand moves. My signature, that E with the hook, that too big M loop that Ruth teased me about for 40 years. My own hand, the hand I'd made sign that Cedar View release form, became the ruler they measured the lie against. And the lie did not measure up. The one who broke it wide open, though, was the real estate agent. Kip Doyle, the bright, hurried voice on the telephone that started this whole reckoning. And how he broke is worth telling, because it's a lesson in how these rings come apart. And they do come apart, almost always, at the weakest and most frightened link. Doyle was not the villain. I want to be fair, even to him. He was a greedy man and a careless one, and he'd let himself not ask questions he was paid handsomely not to ask, which is its own kind of crime, but he was not the architect. Cole was the architect. Doyle was a man who'd taken a fat commission to move a property fast and quiet, and had told himself the seller's paperwork was the seller's problem, not his. But when Detective Sandoval sat him down and laid it out, the forged deed, the old man in the nursing home, the felonies stacking up like cordwood, and the word accomplice said slow and clear, Kip Doyle discovered that his loyalty to a fat commission was a good deal thinner than his fear of a prison cell. He did what the weak link always does when the honest people finally lean on it. He rolled. He gave them everything. The emails, the phone records, the timeline, the meetings, the whole architecture of it, laid out to save his own skin. And in saving his own skin, he handed us the case. And he handed us something else, something that turned my stomach and then hardened my resolve into something like iron. He handed us the list. Because my ranch wasn't the only one. Of course it wasn't. Deb Hollis told me from the first day, it's never just the one. Cole and Doyle had been working a pattern, quiet, patient, targeting a particular kind of person, old, land-rich, recently widowed, with heirs far away or estranged, with valuable dirt and failing help, and nobody watching close. They'd found them the way predators always find prey, by reading the signs the rest of us walk past. The obituaries, the tax rolls, the church prayer lists, the talk at the feed store about who'd had a fall, who'd lost a spouse, who was struggling to keep up. And on Kip Doyle's list, 3 names down from mine, was a widow I'll call Hazel Okafor, 81 years old, up at the top of Ash Creek, on a little place her husband had homesteaded, and she'd held on to alone for 11 years since he passed. 200 acres and a spring that never failed, which in that country is worth more than gold, and a son in another state who called on Sundays and hadn't visited in 3 years. And arthritis so bad she could barely sign her own name anymore, which, if you're a certain kind of animal, doesn't make her harder to rob. It makes her easier, because a shaky signature is a forger's dream. Nobody looks twice at a shaky signature on an old woman's deed. Hazel was next. The paperwork was already being drawn. Doyle's records showed it. A prospect. A motivated situation. A plan to have Cole befriend her the way he'd befriended his grip on my accounts, to start with the helpful hand, to work the same slow, patient theft. In another 2-3 months, Hazel Okafor would have sold her spring and her 200 acres to a holding company she'd never heard of, and her far-off son would have gotten a phone call telling him his mother had made a foolish decision in her declining years, and by the time anybody untangled it, she'd have been in a home like Cedar View, being told her memory was going, and the spring that never failed would have failed her at last. Except, we got there first. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it's the part of this whole story I hold on to hardest on the bad nights. If I had lain down in that gray place at Cedar View, if I had believed I was the confused old fool they'd decided I was, and closed my eyes and let them win, then Hazel Okafor loses her spring too, and the next name on the list after Hazel, and the next. My fight was never only my fight. When one of the old and trusting stands up and says out loud, in front of everyone, this was done to me, and it was wrong, and I will not be shamed into silence about it, that standing up reaches further than you can see. It saves people you'll never meet. It's a fence you build in the dark that turns a predator away from a door you'll never know, was almost opened. Nora and Deb and I drove up Ash Creek the very afternoon we learned Hazel's name, and we sat in her little kitchen, and we didn't frighten her. We just told her the truth, gentle, and helped her put her own protections in place, and got her far-off son on the phone, and made him understand, really understand for the first time, what almost happened and why he needed to come home more than once a year. And Hazel Okafor still lives on her place today, and her spring still runs, and every time I think of it, I thank God I got out of that bed. Word of what had happened got around Rimrock County the way word does. And here is where I have to tell you about the neighbors, because I'd forgotten something about people while I was down in my grief, and they reminded me. I'd started to believe, that winter, that I was alone. That's the lie a place like Cedar View whispers. And it's the lie a betrayal whispers loudest of all. You're on your own now, old man. Nobody's coming, nobody cares. And it was a lie. When it came out what Cole had done, My neighbors came. They came with casseroles, and they came with firewood, and they came with something better than either, which was their plain, furious loyalty. Del Foley. I'll call him Gus, an old rancher whose land runs against mine on the west. My oldest friend, a man I'd calved beside and buried friends beside for 50 years. Gus came up my drive the day he heard, and he was so mad he could barely talk, and I had to calm him down instead of the other way around. And Gus said a thing that shamed me and healed me at the same time. He said, "Earl, I knew something was wrong. Back in the fall, I saw you at the sale barn and you looked hollowed out. And I heard the talk about you slipping, and Earl, I believed it. A little. I'm ashamed to say it, but I believed it, because it was easier than driving over here and finding out. And I let a whole winter go by, not checking on my best friend, because I let myself believe the story some slick fella was spreading. And if I'd just come over, if I'd just once come over and sat on your porch and looked at you with my own eyes, instead of listening to talk, I'd have seen you were fine, and none of this..." And he couldn't finish it. And I said, "Gus, you're here now. Because that's the thing. That's the whole thing about all of it. About the neighbors who believed the talk, and the daughter who believed her brother, and even, God help me, the father who believed his son. We are none of us as watchful as we ought to be. We all let the comfortable story stand because checking is hard and doubting the people we love feels like a sin. But it is never too late to come over. It is never too late to look with your own eyes." Gus was there now, and he brought half the county with him, and when it came time to stand up in that courtroom, I did not stand up alone. I stood up with a daughter on one side and a grandson on the other, and a whole county at my back, and that changed everything, because the thing they'd counted on, that I was isolated, that I was alone, that no one would believe the old man over the charming son, that thing was no longer true. They'd tried to make me alone, and instead, I ended up more surrounded by love than I'd been since Ruth died. That's the strange grace that sometimes comes out the far side of these things. The very isolation they engineer, once it's broken, breaks into its opposite. The civil side came first, and it came almost quiet, which surprised me. I'd braced for a war and instead watched a lie simply fail to survive contact with the record. Once Deb filed the dispute and the sheriff opened the case, the sale to Ash Creek Holdings didn't so much get stopped as evaporate. No title company on earth would insure that deal once the forgery was on the table. Insuring title is nothing but a company betting money that the seller really owns the thing, and no one bets on a forged hand. The lenders who'd been going to put up money against my ranch pulled back so fast you'd have thought the ground was on fire, which, in a way, it was. And Deb went into court with the plainest lawsuit she said she'd ever filed. A quiet title action, it's called, which is a beautiful name when you think about it. An action to quiet the title, to make the noise and the lies and the false papers stop, and to let the true record speak in the silence. She laid the forged quitclaim in front of the judge next to the Cedar View logs that put me 41 miles away on the day I supposedly signed it, next to the handwriting examiner's report, next to the notary's own admission, next to Danny's testimony about the practice signatures burned in a sink. And the judge, a sensible woman who'd seen a few things, did not take long. She declared the quitclaim deed void, not weak, not disputed, void, a nothing, as if it had never been, and ordered it struck from the record and confirmed what June Halverson had read out loud in the recorder's office weeks before. Owner of record, Earl J. Mercer, sole owner, exactly as it had been for 38 years. The lie came out of the book. My name stayed in it. The title was quiet again. I drove home that day and I stood under the crossbeam with the rocking M, and I put my hand on the post I'd set 40 years before, and I said, "Ruth, we kept it. The kid's inheritance is safe. Danny's going to run this place someday, just like he said." And the wind came down off the bulls and moved through the cottonwoods along the creek, and I chose to hear her in it. And maybe that's a foolish old man's comfort, and maybe it isn't, but I'll keep it. The criminal side was not quiet, and it was not quick, and it took everything I had, because civil court decides who owns the ranch, but criminal court decides whether a man goes to prison, and no prosecutor puts somebody's son in a cell without being sure. And being sure meant a trial, and a trial meant I had to do the thing Deb had warned me about that first day in her office over the hardware store. I had to sit in a witness chair and look across a room at my own boy and tell 12 strangers the truth about him, out loud, under oath. They charged Cole with a stack of felonies: forgery, filing a false instrument, theft, and the one that mattered most to me, exploitation of a vulnerable adult, which is what the law calls it when someone uses their position of trust to prey on the old. They charged the young notary too, though lighter, and he pled and testified, and I felt no joy in his ruin, only a sad wish that somebody had taught him sooner that there are no small dishonest favors. Kip Doyle they charged, and he cooperated all the way down and got the deal that cooperators get, and I made my peace with that, because his rolling over saved Hazel and me both, and I've decided the good a coward accidentally does still counts as good in the ledger. But Cole would not deal. Cole would not plead. Cole, to the very end, believed his own story. Believed he could charm a jury the way he'd charmed a county his whole golden life. And so, we went to trial, and I have never dreaded anything the way I dreaded walking into that courtroom. And I have never been prouder of anything than I am of walking in anyway. His lawyers ran exactly the defense you'd expect. The defense they always run. The defense that is the whole reason these crimes work in the first place. And I want to tell you about it plainly so you'll recognize it. Because it is the cruelest turn in the entire cruel business. They put my mind on trial. That was the strategy. Not to deny the deed, they couldn't. The handwriting was the handwriting. Their play was to argue that maybe, in my confusion, in my grief, in my declining years, I had signed something and forgotten. That maybe I'd meant to give Cole the ranch in a foggy moment and change my mind later and cried forgery. That the real victim here was a devoted son being persecuted by a father whose memory was failing. The very failing memory, mind you, that they themselves had invented and spread for 2 years to set this whole thing up. Do you see the trap of it? The lie they told to rob me became the defense they raised when they were caught. First they told the world I was losing my mind so they could steal from me, and then, when the theft was exposed, they pointed at the very story they had planted and said, "See, he's confused. You can't trust what he says." My sanity was the crime scene, and my sanity was the alibi, both. To fight it, I had to prove I was sound. And any protest, any anger, any grief, they'd hold up and say, "Look how agitated. Look how unreliable. It is a maze built so that every turn is a wall. And there is only one way out of it. And Deb Hollis taught it to me the night before I testified, sitting at Ruth's kitchen table. "Earl," she said, "tomorrow they're going to try to make you angry, because angry old men look confused to a jury. And they're going to try to make you grieve, because a crying man looks weak. Don't give them either one. You just tell the truth, slow and plain, the way you'd tell a neighbor. You've got the one thing they can never argue with. You've got the record. You've got the deed. You've got the dates. Every time they try to make it about your mind, you bring it back to the paper. They want to fight about how you feel. Give them a fact about what happened. The paper doesn't grieve, and the paper doesn't rage, and the paper doesn't forget. Stand on the paper, Earl. Stand on it like it's your own ground. Because it is. Stand on the paper." I said it to myself all that night, and all the drive into the county seat, and all the terrible long minutes waiting outside that courtroom, with Nora's hand in one of mine, and Danny's shoulder against the other. Stand on the paper. And then they called my name, my real name. In my real hand it had been signed on 100 true documents and forged on one false one. And I walked into that courtroom, past the jury, past the lawyers, past my son who would not meet my eyes, and I put my hand on a Bible that had a real heft to it, the same book Ruth read at that kitchen table, and I swore to tell the truth, and I sat down, and I got ready to do the hardest thing a father can do. The county attorney, I'll call her Paula Reyes, a calm, unhurried woman who reminded me a little of Ruth in the way she waited before she spoke, walked me through it gentle and slow, and I told it the way I've told you. The land, the 40 years, Ruth, the spells, Cedar View, the phone call, the drive to the courthouse. June reading the name out loud. I stood on the paper the whole time. Every time my voice wanted to shake, I put my hand flat on the rail of that witness box like it was a fence post, and I made myself feel the wood, and I kept going. And when Paula Reyes asked me at the end, "Mr. Mercer, did you ever, at any time, sign a deed giving your ranch to your son or to anyone?" I looked at the jury, 12 ordinary Rimrock County people, farmers and clerks and a school teacher and a mechanic, and I said, "No, ma'am, not ever. I built that place with my wife over 40 years, and I'd have died before I signed it away in secret while my back was turned. The hand that signed that deed was not my hand. I know my own hand. I've been making these same letters since before that boy was born. And I held up my right hand, the crooked, spotted working hand of an old rancher, and there was not one sound in that courtroom. Then it was the defense's turn, and it went exactly as Deb had said it would, and I'm glad she'd warned me, because otherwise, I don't think I could have borne it. A smooth lawyer stood up and came toward me, with a sorrowful, respectful face, the way Cole used to come up the porch steps, and he started in. Oh, so gently, on my mind. Wasn't it true I'd had memory troubles? Wasn't it true I'd left the stove on? Wasn't it true I'd gotten lost driving home? Wasn't it true my own family had been so worried they'd placed me in care? Wasn't it possible, just possible, that a grieving man of my age might have signed a paper and simply not recalled it? Wasn't it possible I was confused, even now, even here? And every one of those questions was a door back into that gray maze, and I could feel the pull of it, feel the anger rising, feel the grief rising, and I knew, I could see it in the lawyer's eyes. That anger or grief was exactly what he was fishing for. One crack of an old man losing his composure to hand the jury the confused they needed. So I did what Ruth would have done, and what Nora would have done, and what I'd promised Deb I'd do. I got quiet. I got very, very quiet and very, very steady, the way you get with a spooked animal or a hard buyer, and I answered him with facts. No, sir, I said. I never left the stove on. My son said I did to my daughter on the telephone to make her think I was slipping. He said a lot of things like that for 2 years to a lot of people. That's how this works, sir. First you tell everybody the old man's mind is going. Then you rob him. Then, when you're caught, you point back at the story you planted and say, see, his mind was going. You've got it backwards, and I understand why. It's your job. But I wasn't confused about my ranch, and I'm not confused now. Ask me the date. Ask me who's president. Ask me the number of deeded acres and the year Ruth and I paid off the note and the name of the banker who sold it to us, whose granddaughter read my name out of that book. Ask me anything with a true answer, and I'll give it to you. But here's the fact you keep walking around, sir, and I'll just keep setting it back in front of you. On the day that deed says I stood in front of a notary and signed away my life's work, I was locked in a bed at Cedar View, 41 miles away. And there's a logbook and a nurse's chart and a camera in a hallway that all say so. A man can't be in two places. I wasn't confused. I was in a nursing home your client put me in. Now, you can ask me about my memory all afternoon. But the deed doesn't have a memory. The record doesn't grieve, and it doesn't forget, and it's still got my name on it, and it never had my hand on that lie. Stand me next to the paper, sir. I'll stand next to the paper all day. He tried a while longer, but I'd found the ground, and I would not come off it. And after a bit, even the jury could see what was happening, could see an old man calmly, patiently, refusing to be turned into the fool the story needed him to be. And the more gently the lawyer pushed on my mind, the worse it looked, because there I sat, plainly in possession of it. Deb told me later that the case turned right there, in those minutes, not on any lawyer's cleverness, but on the simple sight of a man standing quiet on the truth while somebody tried to talk him off it. Juries know. They've all got an old father or grandfather somewhere. They know what it looks like when one's being robbed and called crazy for noticing. The hardest moment of my life was not the cross-examination. It was a thing that happened during a recess in the hallway, when for just a moment Cole and I ended up near each other with no lawyers between us, and he looked at me, really looked, the mask down, tired, cornered, 46 years old, and finally out of stories. And he didn't say sorry, he couldn't get there, but something in his face asked me a question, and the question was, do you still? And he couldn't finish it even in his own eyes. Do you still? And I understood he meant, do you still love me after all this? And I understood that the true and terrible answer, the answer that has cost me more sleep than the forgery ever did, was yes. Yes, you fool. Yes, you thief. Yes, my boy. Of course I do. I will love you from the witness stand while I help send you to prison. That's the thing they never understand, the ones who use our love as the crowbar. They think if they abuse it enough, it'll turn to hate and let them off the hook of being loved by the very people they wronged. But it doesn't. Not in a real parent. Not all the way. It just turns to grief. And I carried that grief up onto the stand and I told the truth anyway. And I have come to believe that is what love actually is, when the shine wears off. Telling the truth about someone even when it breaks your own heart to do it. because the lie would cost them their soul, and the truth might, someday, a long way off, save it. The jury was out 2 hours. I've been asked since if those were the worst 2 hours, and they weren't. Those 2 hours I sat on a bench in that hallway with Nora holding one of my hands and Danny holding the other, and Gus and Hazel and half of Rimrock County filling up the benches around us. And I was not alone, and after 40 years of thinking a man's strength was in standing by himself, I finally understood that the whole time the real strength had been in this, in not being alone, in the hands, in the people who come over and look with their own eyes and stay. Whatever the verdict was going to be, they'd already given me the thing Cole had tried hardest to steal, which was never the ranch. It was this. It was belonging to people who'd stand up in a public room and say, "We know this man, and we know the truth of him." Then the bailiff called us back in, and we stood, and the foreman, the school teacher, as it happened, a woman about Nora's age, read out guilty on the count that mattered most to me, the exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and then guilty again and again and again, down the whole stack. And I did not cheer, and nobody around me cheered, because there is no cheering when it's your own son, but I felt something settle in me that had been standing crooked since February, the way a gate finally hangs true once you've reset the post. The record was the record. The truth had climbed all the way back up into the light. The books had balanced in the end. There was a sentencing some weeks later, and the judge let me speak, and I want to tell you what I said, or the heart of it, because I'd thought hard about it, and it's the closest I've come to putting the whole lesson in one place. I stood up, and I did not read from a paper, and I looked at the judge and not at Cole, because I couldn't look at Cole and keep my voice, and I said something like this: "Your Honor, folks expect a man in a place to come up here and ask for the harshest thing the law allows. I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to do the opposite either and ask you to let him off, because that would be its own kind of lie, and I've had my fill of lies. I'll just ask you for the true thing, whatever that is. This is my son. I held him the hour he was born. His mother, who's buried on our place, loved him with everything she had. And he did a terrible thing, not just to me, to the whole idea that a person ought to be able to trust their own family, which is a thing that once it's broken is very hard to mend. And he broke it on purpose, for money. And he'd have let me die in that home, believing my own mind had failed me. And he'd have gone on to do it to a widow up the creek, and God knows who after her. That has to be answered. Not because I want revenge, I don't. Revenge is just one more debt that never balances. But because there's a widow named Hazel still on her land today, only because this got stopped, and the only thing that stops the next one is that doing it costs something. So let it cost him. Let it cost him honestly, and let it cost him fair. But I'd ask the court, and I'd ask everybody listening, to understand that I am not here as a man who hates his son. I'm here as a man who loves his son enough to tell the truth about him, which is the last and hardest thing I had left to give him. I hope somewhere down this long road, he finds his way back to being the boy his mother knew. There's a place for him on that land to grieve and to mend, when his debt's paid, if he ever wants it. The gate'll be shut, but it won't be locked. That's all. That's all I've got to say. And I sat down. And Nora was crying, and Danny was crying, and I found that I wasn't, that I'd cried it all out already over the 6 weeks and the trial, and what was left in me was quiet and clear, like the flat of Ash Creek at first light. The judge gave Cole prison, real prison, years of it, the numbers his to carry and not mine to publish, and ordered him to pay back what could be paid back, though the truth is the money was mostly gone, sunk in the hole he'd dug. And I never expected to see much of it and never much cared. It was never the money. It was never even the land, not really. It was the trust, and you can't order restitution on trust. That gets rebuilt one true day at a time, or not at all, and only by the one who broke it, and only if he chooses to, and that choice was going to have to be Cole's, someday, in his own time, and out of my hands. I drove home from the sentencing the same 41 miles I'd driven that first morning, except this time Nora was beside me, and Danny was in the back, and the light was doing that long gold thing it does on the plains in the evening, laying down across the grass, so every stem throws a shadow a yard long, and I turned in under the crossbeam with the rocking M, and I was not afraid of anything anymore. And I understood that whatever else Cole had taken, and whatever else he'd wrecked, he had not managed to take the one thing he'd been aiming at all along, which was this ground and this name, and the future of both. Let me tell you how it is now, because I don't want to leave you standing in the courtroom. That's not where a story like this should end. It should end where it started, on the land, with the living. I'm still on the ranch. 74 turns 75 turns 76, and my knees are worse, and my back is worse, and I don't go down in the corral anymore because I got my blood pressure sorted out, which is a thing a 10-minute doctor's visit could have fixed at the start if anybody had wanted me fixed instead of filed away. Nora comes up every school break and most long weekends, and she and Paul are talking about moving back for good when he retires. Back to the country she couldn't wait to leave at 18. Because a person learns, if they're lucky, what's worth staying for. We call each other twice a week now, my daughter and me, sometimes about nothing, and I will never again let a distance grow between us that another person could crawl into. That's a promise I made to Ruth, and I mean to keep it. And Danny. Danny finished school, and he's on the ranch full-time now. And here's the thing I did, the thing that means the most to me of anything in this whole business. I sat down with Deb Hollis, and we did it right. In the open, with lawyers and papers and everything above the table where the sun could see it. And I made my grandson my partner in the Rocking M, and set it up so that someday, the honest way, the daylight way, with his name recorded in that same book at the courthouse where the lie once sat for 3 weeks, this land will be his. Not stolen, not forged, given. In front of God and the county recorder and everybody, the way a thing is supposed to pass from an old hand to a young one. Danny runs cattle now, with a feel his father never had, and he's got a girl he's sweet on, and I've caught him more than once standing at the corral rail looking out at the grass with an expression I recognize, because it's the one I've worn for 40 years. The look of a man who loves his ground and knows it'll cost him everything and has decided it's worth it. He's Ruth's. He's mine. The land found its rightful hand after all. Hazel Okafor still runs her place at the top of the creek, and her son came home and stayed home, and she and I have supper together every couple weeks. 2 old holdouts and our 2 springs that never fail. And we don't talk much about what almost happened, but sometimes she'll reach over and pat my hand, and I know what it means. It means thank you for getting out of that bed. And I pat hers back, and it means you're welcome, and it means we made it, and it means we're not alone. And Cole? People always want to know about Cole. He's still inside, as I tell you this. He writes to Danny sometimes, and Danny reads the letters and doesn't answer most of them. And I've told the boy that's his to decide, and I won't push him one direction or the other, because a son gets to work out his own peace with his father in his own time, and it's not mine to hurry. Cole wrote to me once, 1 letter, near 2 years in. It wasn't a good letter, mostly, still full of the old excuses, the old story about how he'd done it for the family, and I read it twice and set it in the wood stove and watched it burn. Not out of hate, but because some stories don't deserve to be kept. But at the very bottom of that letter, under all the excuses, there were 4 words in his own true hand. I know it's his hand. I know my own boy's hand the way I know my own. 4 words that weren't part of the story, that just slipped out from under it. I'm sorry, Dad. Really. And I've decided to believe those 4 words are the real ones. And all the rest is the noise a drowning man makes. And I keep them, and I don't keep the rest. The gate's still shut. It's still not locked. That much I can do, and I'll go on doing it because I'm his father. And a father keeps a gate for his boy his whole life long, even when the boy's the one who broke it. Now, I've told you my story, the whole shape of it, and if that were all I had for you, I'd let you go. But I'm an old man, and old men can't help but try to hand the young the map they had to draw the hard way. So bear with me a while longer, because there are things I learned in that gray winter that I'd give a great deal to have known the spring before. And maybe if I set them out plain, they'll save somebody listening the walk I had to take. I want to talk to you about how it happens. Not so you can do it, God forbid. And if that's why you're listening, turn this off and go make your peace with your maker. But so you can see it coming, in your own life or in the life of somebody you love, while there's still time to turn it. Because here is the first hard truth. It almost never looks like a robbery while it's happening. If it looked like a robbery, we'd all fight it off. It looks like love. That's the whole terrible genius of it. It looks exactly like love. And it uses the real love you've got as the road it walks in on. Watch for the helpful hand that wants the passwords. That's near always the first move, and it's the one I fell for, so I've earned the right to warn you off it. Somebody who loves you, a child, a new friend, a nice young person from church, a caregiver, starts by taking the hard chores off your plate. The bills, the banking, the paperwork you never liked anyway. And it feels like a kindness, and sometimes it truly is one, and that's what makes it so hard to tell. But real help leaves you more in control of your own life, not less. Real help teaches you the online banking so you can do it yourself. The other kind sets it up so only they can see it. Real help sits down beside you and goes through the mail together. The other kind takes the mail away. Watch the direction of it. Is this making me more able or more dependent? A hand that's holding you up is one thing. A hand that's slowly wrapping around your wrist is another, and they can feel the same at first. And the only way to tell them apart is to ask, plainly, out loud, can I still do this myself if I want to? And to watch very carefully how they answer. Watch for the one who worries about your mind, out loud, to other people. This is the one that nearly cost me my daughter, so mark it hardest. A person setting up to rob you needs the world prepared in advance to disbelieve you when you finally cry out. So they lay the groundwork, gentle, sorrowful, oh so concerned. They tell your other children you're slipping. They mention to the neighbors that you got confused the other day. They plant the story of your failing mind like a farmer plants a field, patient in season, so that months later when you say, I've been robbed, everyone around you has already been taught to hear it as the raving of a mind that's going. If someone is narrating your decline to an audience, especially an audience of the very people who would otherwise protect you, pay attention. That is not concern. Concern comes to you. It sits with you. It takes you to the doctor to get you fixed. It does not go around behind your back telling everyone you're broken. When help is really help, it wants you well. When it's the other thing, it wants you doubted. Watch for the wall that goes up between you and the people who'd take your side. Cole's smartest, wickedest work was not the forgery. Any fool with a pen can forge. His masterwork was the slow, quiet wall he built between me and Nora, so that when the blow came, we were already turned away from each other, each believing the other had drifted off. If you notice that a person who's become very involved in your life is also, somehow, always the reason you see less of your other kin, always carrying a message about how so-and-so is too busy, or doesn't want to intrude, or thinks it's better this way, be careful. Predators isolate. It's the oldest move in nature. The wolf doesn't take the strong steer in the middle of the herd. It cuts one off, gets it alone, gets it away from the others who'd turn and fight. When someone is quietly cutting you out of the herd, even someone you love, even someone who says it's for your own good, that is the moment to plant your feet and call every last member of that herd yourself, directly, and compare notes, and refuse to let anyone stand between you and the people who love you. Nora and I would have caught the whole thing in a week if we'd only compared notes. We didn't, because a wall had been built, and we each thought the silence on the other side of it was indifference, when it was engineering. And watch, above all, for the papers slid across the table. This one's simple, and it's the last line of defense, and it never fails you. Do not sign what you have not read, do not read what you do not understand, and do not understand it alone. Anytime anyone, asks an older person to sign something, there should be a plain answer to a plain question. What is this exactly? And what does it do? And who benefits? If the answer is hurried or vague or wrapped in a lot of reassurance about how it's just a formality, just to protect you, just easier this way, stop. Every terrible paper in the history of the world was just a formality to somebody. Take it to a lawyer you chose, not one they chose. Take it to the other kids. Take a week. A person who means you well will never begrudge you a week and a second set of eyes. A person who means you harm will push, will hurry, will make you feel foolish or ungrateful for wanting to understand your own affairs. The pushing is the tell. The honest are patient because the truth can afford to be patient. Only a lie is ever in a hurry. I want to say something now to one person in particular, and if it's not you, you'll forgive an old man. And if it is you, then this whole long story was really just my way of getting to you. I'm talking to the one who's ashamed, because I know you're out there. Maybe it already happened to you, years ago or last month, and you never told a living soul. Maybe it was a child or a second husband or a smiling stranger who turned into a friend too fast, and they took your savings or your house or your good name. And the reason you never told anyone isn't that you're stupid, it's that you're ashamed. You feel like a fool. You feel like people will look at you and think, how could you not have seen it? How could you have signed that? How could you have trusted them? And so, you carry it alone, in the dark, and it eats at you, and the shame does more damage over the years than the theft ever did. Listen to me. I sat in that gray place at Cedar View, and I felt that exact shame. The shame that says you brought this on yourself. You old fool. You should have known. And it is a lie. It is the last lie the thief tells you, and it's the cruelest, because he's not even in the room anymore. He's left the shame behind to do his work for him, like a man who poisons the well and rides off, and the poison keeps killing long after he's gone. So let me pull that poison out of the well right now tonight, for good. You were not a fool. You were trusting, and trust is not foolishness. Trust is the finest thing our kind ever built. Every good thing in this world runs on it. A country runs on it. A marriage runs on it. A handshake at a sale barn, a name on a deed, a child asleep in the back seat, certain the driver will get her home. All of it, trust, the whole beautiful machinery of human life. The one who abused your trust did not expose a weakness in you. He exposed a wickedness in himself. The shame is his. It was always his. He just handed it to you on his way out the door because he had no more use for it and you were kind enough to take it. Well, hand it back. Set it down. It was never yours to carry. And then, if you can, tell somebody. Tell one person. Tell a daughter, a pastor, a lawyer, a sheriff, a stranger on the telephone whose whole job is to listen. Because the second you say it out loud to another human being, this was done to me, and it was wrong, and it was not my fault. The shame loses its grip, and the thing that has held you silent for years lets go, and you can breathe. I've seen it happen. I felt it happen to me, standing at that front desk making a phone call while a room full of strangers pretended not to listen. The silence is the prison. The saying, it is the key. Where are you watching me from tonight? I asked you that at the start, and I've been talking to you this whole long while like you were right across a fence from me, and maybe by now you feel like you are. What town, what county, what country, I don't know your face, and I never will. But I know some things about you, because you're still here, this far into an old rancher's story, and that tells me something. It tells me either you love somebody old and you're scared for them, and if so, go call them. Tonight, don't wait, go look at them with your own eyes. Or it tells me you were the one this happened to, or is happening to, and you needed to hear another old voice say the words out loud so you'd know you weren't crazy and you weren't alone. You're not crazy. You're not alone. I'm still here. Stay with me. There's just a little more, and then I'll let you go, and I want you to go carrying the right things. Because here's what I couldn't have told you back in February, lying gray in that bed, believing I'd lost everything. I hadn't lost everything. I'd lost my illusions is all, and those needed losing. I lost the illusion that a man stands strongest alone. He doesn't. I nearly died of standing alone, and only lived because a daughter, and a grandson, and an aide, and a clerk, and a neighbor, and a little lawyer over a hardware store all put their hands on me and held me up. I lost the illusion that love means never having to tell a hard truth. It doesn't. The hardest truth I ever told was the most loving thing I ever did, and I told it about my own son from a witness stand. And I lost the illusion that the world is a fog too thick for an ordinary person to fight through. It isn't. Underneath all the fog and all the stories, there is a hard, clean floor of fact, a deed, a date, a record, a name in a book, and any honest soul can stand on that floor and be held up by it, because decent people built it over long years for exactly that. I lost my illusions, and in the place where they'd been, something truer grew back, which, come to think of it, is just about the only thing that ever happens on a piece of land worth having. You lose the crop you thought you'd get, and if you don't quit, if you stay on the ground and keep faith with it, something you didn't plant and couldn't have planted comes up in its place, and half the time, it feeds you better than what you lost. I go up the hill most evenings now, to the cottonwood where Ruth lies, when the work's done, and the light's going long and gold across the grass. It's a good walk for an old man, just far enough to remind me I'm still walking, and I stand up there where you can see the whole place, the house, the barn with the rocking M on the crossbeam, the creek and its cottonwoods, the far pasture that waters now because of a pipe. Ruth said we should plant our good year into, instead of spending. And I talk to her, not out loud, mostly. And I tell her how the cattle look, and how Danny's coming along, and how Nora called. And I tell her over and over, some evenings, thank you for the ledger, Thank you for the green book and the sharpened pencil and the 40 years of chasing a nickel that wouldn't add up because somebody was hiding something. Because that was the thing that saved us in the end. Not my strength. I didn't have any left that winter. Her habit of mind. Her stubborn old-fashioned faith that the books balance in the end. That the truth is written down somewhere in ink that can't be smudged, and that a patient soul who keeps faith with the record will always, always be handed the truth in time if they don't quit before it comes. That's not just about ledgers, what Ruth believed. I've come to think it's about the whole shape of things. There's a record kept, maybe in a courthouse book, maybe in the memory of a county, maybe. And here's where I'll say the thing some of you have been waiting for me to say, and some of you have been dreading, and I'll say it gentle, the way I mean it. Maybe in a book kept by a hand a good deal older and larger than any county recorder's. I was raised on my knees, and I got up off them for a lot of years, mad at God about Ruth, the way you get. But that winter, in that gray place when I had nothing left, the thing that steadied me in the dark wasn't a lawyer or a plan. It came before the lawyer and the plan. It was old and quiet, and it didn't argue. It just put a hand on the withers of my spooked soul and said, "Easy now, not that way, this way." And it got my feet on the cold floor at dawn. I don't tell any man what to make of that. I only tell you what happened to me. Make of it what your own heart makes, but I'll tell you what I believe, since you've come this far with me, and then I'll leave it. I believe there is a record kept of every hidden thing, and that it balances in the end, always. The way Ruth's ledger balanced, past midnight, to the penny. I believe the deed that's forged in the dark and the true name that stands under it are both written in that book, and that the true name is the one that stands. I believe what a plainer man than me wrote a long time ago, that you reap what you sow, that the man who plants a lie in the dark harvests it, in the dark, at a time he doesn't choose, and the man who keeps faith with the truth through a hard winter is handed a spring he didn't earn and couldn't have forced. I've seen it now with my own eyes, on my own land, done to my own family. Coal sowed in secret and reaped in a courtroom. I kept faith with a name in a book, and I was handed my whole life back, and a grandson to give it to, and a daughter's hand across the distance, and a widow up the creek still safe on her spring, and evenings on a hill with the woman I love, which no forger's pen could ever touch, because it was never written on any paper a man could steal. I said, at the start, I'm not a clever man, and I'm not. And everything I've told you tonight, the wise ones already knew and said better. But there's one thing an old rancher can maybe say better than a clever man, because he's spent his life watching things grow and die and grow again, and it's this. The land don't lie, and neither does the record, and neither, in the end, does time. You can burn a lie in a sink and practice a false hand on a legal pad and slide a paper across a table to a grieving old man. And for a few weeks, a few months, you can make the false thing look like the true one. But the grass comes up where the seed really fell, not where you said it fell. The deed carries the name that's really on it, not the one you wish were. And the truth has a way of climbing back up into the light no matter how deep you bury it, patient as a spring working its way up through rock. Because that is simply the nature of truth, the way it's the nature of water to find its level, and the nature of a seed to reach for the sun. They buried mine 3 weeks deep in a county book. It took me one hard drive and one honest clerk to bring it back up into the light. And once it was up, it stood. It's still standing. It'll stand after I'm gone, in a book with my name on it, and then Danny's The Daylight Way, forever. Before I give you the plain lessons to carry home, I have to praise some people, because a story that only names the villain and the wronged has left out the most important folks in it, and I won't do that. This whole thing turned not on the powerful, but on a handful of ordinary people who, at the moment it counted, chose to do their small job honestly. And I have come to believe that's where nearly everything good in this world actually gets done. Not by the mighty, but by regular souls doing the right small thing at the right small moment, when it would have been so easy and so understandable to look away. Think of it. If B, that night aide, had done what 19 years of overwork would have excused her for doing and just let that phone call go and told herself it wasn't her business, I'd likely have lost the ranch, and Hazel would have lost her spring, and none of the rest could have happened. She made about what you'd guess for working nights in a nursing home. She had every reason in the world to keep her head down, and instead, she came and got me, and told me to keep my eyes open, and steadied me in the dark with a word about the morning, belonging to whoever's still standing to see it. A great deal of justice in this world rides on people exactly that tired choosing, anyway, to care. I've thought since that we build our fine systems, our records and our courts and our laws, and they're good, they matter. I've praised them all night, but not one of them works without a bee somewhere inside it. Some underpaid soul who decides the human being in front of them matters more than the easy thing. The system is only ever as honest as the least noticed person in it. Remember that. Whatever small, honest job you hold, you may be the bay in somebody's story and never know it. And June Halverson, at the recorder's counter, who could have said, "Come back later," or filled out a form, or told me she wasn't allowed. Instead, read a Citizen the Public Record out loud because that is what the record is for, and then said, "Don't touch anything. Sit down. Let me make some calls," because she understood in her bones that she was the keeper of the county's memory, and that a crime had been committed in her book, and it was hers to help set right. And Detective Sandoval, who'd spent 15 years watching the old get robbed and rarely being able to prove it, and who treated my case not like paperwork, but like the thing he'd been waiting his whole career to finally nail. And Deb Hollis, 5'0" over a hardware store, who grew up watching a bank take her family's place, and decided to spend her life making sure it was harder to steal a home than it had been to steal her family's. And even Kip Doyle, coward that he was, whose fear did an accidental good when his courage never would have. And a schoolteacher on a jury who read out guilty in a steady voice. And a whole county that came with casseroles and firewood and plain furious loyalty and filled up the benches so an old man wouldn't sit alone. None of them were heroes the way the movies mean it. They were just people who did their own small right thing at the moment it was theirs to do. And it was enough. Stacked together, it was more than enough. It beat a clever, charming, desperate man and his whole architecture of lies. Never believe your small, honest choice doesn't matter. In the story you're standing in right now, and you're standing in one, we all always are, you may be exactly the ordinary soul whose one right choice holds the whole thing up. Now, let me turn and talk to the other side of it for a minute. Let me talk to the sons and the daughters, to the grown children of old people, the ones far away, the busy ones, the good ones who mean no harm at all. Because you're in this story too, and not always where you'd like to be. I don't blame Nora. I've said it and I'll say it again. She did nothing wrong. She was lied to by someone she was right to trust. But I'll tell you what almost happened to Nora and me, so you can keep it from happening to you and yours. A distance grew between us. An ordinary, painless-seeming distance, the kind that grows between people who love each other and are busy and are 2 states apart and figure there's always next month, next holiday, next year. And that ordinary distance is exactly the gap a predator crawls into. It's the unwatched ground. So here is what I'd ask of every grown child listening, and I'd ask it as a father who nearly drowned in that gap. Close the distance. Not out of guilt, out of love, and out of plain good sense. Call your old folks more than you think you need to, and not just on birthdays. And when someone, even a brother, even a sister, even a trusted helper, starts carrying you messages about how mom's slipping, or dad doesn't want to be a burden, or it's better if you give them space, or I'll handle it, don't you worry. Do not take that at face value, ever, no matter how much you love and trust the one carrying it. Go see for yourself. Get on the plane. Sit at the kitchen table. Look at your parent with your own 2 eyes. Ask them directly, alone, away from the helpful one. Are you all right, really? Is anyone pressuring you? Do you understand your own affairs? Do you feel free? It costs you a weekend and a plane ticket. It might save their whole life, and yours, and the thing between you that's worth more than any ranch. The people who prey on the old count absolutely count, on the far-off child being too busy or too trusting to just come and look. Prove them wrong. Be the child who comes and looks. That is the fence that turns the wolf away before it ever gets near the herd, and you're the only one who can build it. And it's built one visit, one honest question, one long look at a time. So, here they are, the plain lessons, the ones I'd carve into a fence post if I could carve small enough. I've been circling them all night. Now let me set them down in a row, the way Ruth would have, numbered and clear, so you can carry them out of here and hand them to somebody who needs them. 1, it never starts with the theft. It starts with the help. Nobody robs an old man by kicking down his door. They rob him by reaching out to hold his hand. and the theft comes so much later that by then he's leaning his whole weight on the very hand that's going to drop him. So, when help arrives, and real help is a blessing, don't turn away the real kind. Keep asking the one question that tells the two kinds apart. Is this making me more able to run my own life, or less? Help that leaves you stronger and freer is love. Help that leaves you weaker and more dependent, no matter how sweetly it's offered, is a leash being fitted, one gentle loop at a time. 2. Trust is not weakness, and being fooled is not a sin. The world will try to teach you the opposite. It will heap shame on the one who trusted and let the one who lied slink off clean. Refuse that arithmetic with everything in you. Trust is the finest thing our kind ever made, and the whole of decent life runs on it. And when someone abuses yours, they have exposed nothing about you but everything about themselves. The shame is theirs. They just leave it behind with you on their way out the door, like a man poisoning a well and riding off. Hand it back. Set it down. It was never yours to carry. 3. Sign nothing you have not read, understand nothing alone, and never let anyone hurry you. Every terrible paper in history was somebody's harmless little formality. Take it to a lawyer you chose. Take it to your other kin. Take a week. The honest can afford to be patient because the truth keeps. Only a lie is ever in a hurry. When someone pushes you to sign fast, makes you feel foolish or ungrateful for wanting to understand your own affairs, the pushing itself is the confession. Slow down exactly where they want you to speed up. That single-held breath has saved more homes than all the lawyers in the country. 4. When someone starts narrating your decline to other people, wake all the way up. Concern comes to you and sits with you and takes you to the doctor to get you well. The other thing goes around behind your back, telling everyone you're slipping, planting the story of your failing mind like a crop, so that when you finally cry out you've been robbed, the whole world has already been taught to hear it as the raving of a mind that's going. Your sanity gets made into the crime scene and the alibi, both. If someone is telling others you're confused instead of helping you be well, that is not love worrying. That is a robbery being set up, months in advance. 5. Predators isolate, so guard the herd with your life. The wolf never takes the steer in the middle of the herd. It cuts one off, gets it alone, gets it away from the ones who turn and fight. The single wickedest thing done to me was not the forged deed. It was the slow, quiet wall built between my daughter and me, so that when the blow fell, we were already turned away from each other. If anyone who's grown very involved in your life is somehow always the reason you see less of your other people, always carrying messages about how they're too busy or think it's better this way, plant your feet. Call every last member of your herd yourself, directly, and compare notes. A wall built by a third party between two people who love each other is never, ever an accident. 6. You are never the only one. It is never just you. The one who's willing to prey on you has done it before or will do it again. Because it isn't a mistake to them, it's a trade. That is a heavy truth, but it's also a freeing one, because it means your fight was never only yours. When you stand up and say out loud, in front of everyone, "This was done to me, and it was wrong, and I will not be shamed into silence," that standing up reaches further than you'll ever see. It saves people you'll never meet. Somewhere up a creek, there's a hazel whose spring still runs because one old man got out of bed. Stand up partly for yourself, yes, but stand up also for the next name on a list you can't see. 7. Stand on the paper. Underneath all the fog, all the charm, all the stories about your failing mind, there is a hard, clean floor of fact, a deed, a date, a record, a name in a book, and any honest soul can stand on it and be held up. They'll want the fight to be about how you feel, because feelings can be made to look confused. Don't give them that fight. Give them a fact about what happened. The record doesn't grieve and doesn't rage and doesn't forget. When they come at your mind, bring it back, every time, to the paper. Stand on it like it's your own ground, because it is, and it will hold you when nothing else will. 8. A man is not his father's sins, and a family is not doomed by its worst member. My son did a terrible thing. My grandson, his own boy, drove 4 hours on a taped-up taillight to stand in the truth against his own father. And he's the finest young rancher in the county now. The blood does not decide it. Each of us decides, every day, with our own 2 hands, who we're going to be. If you're carrying the shame of something an older person you love did wrong, set it down. It was never yours. And if you're a parent watching one child go bad, don't give up on the others, and don't give up entirely on the one who's fallen. Keep the gate shut if you must, but you don't have to lock it. 9. Love sometimes means telling the hardest truth. The people who use our love as a crowbar are betting that if they abuse it enough, it'll turn to hate and let them off the hook of being loved by the ones they wronged. It doesn't. Not in a real parent. It just turns to grief, and you carry the grief up onto the witness stand, and you tell the truth anyway. Because the lie would cost them their soul, and the truth, told in love, might someday save it. That is what love actually is once the shine wears off. Telling the truth about someone even when it breaks your own heart, because you want their soul more than you want their smile. 10. The truth climbs back up into the light, but only if somebody carries it there. This is the one I'd carve deepest. The truth is patient, and it is strong, and in the long run, it always rises, the way water finds its level and a seed reaches for the sun. But, in the short run, it needs a hand. It needed my hand on a steering wheel driving 41 miles. It needed June's hand pulling a record and reading it out loud. It needed Bee's hand on my shoulder in the dark, and Nora's across 1,000 miles, and Danny's telling what he saw, and Deb's laying paper next to paper. The truth will win in the end. But the end doesn't come by itself. It comes because ordinary, frightened, tired people decide to get out of bed and carry the truth up into the light where it can stand. Be one of the hands. In your own story, and in somebody else's, be one of the hands that carries it up. Let me give you one more picture before I say the last things, because I don't want to leave you with lessons and lists. I want to leave you with a morning, a real one, because the whole point of surviving a hard winter is the spring you get to stand in on the far side of it, and I stood in one, and it was worth every mile of the winter. It was calving season, the first full one after the trial, and if you've never been up before dawn in calving season on the high plains, I can't fully give it to you, but I'll try, because it's the closest thing I know to being handed your life back with interest. It's cold, black cold, stars still hard overhead, and you're out in it because a heifer's due, and a first calf heifer can get in trouble, and you don't leave them to it. And that morning, it was Danny and me, the two of us, breath smoking, flashlights bobbing, and we had a heifer down and struggling and a calf coming wrong. And there's a thing that happens in that moment where 40 years of knowing pours down out of an old man's hands into a young man's. No time for words. Just do this. Now here, feel that. Wait now. And between us, the two of us, in the freezing dark, we got that calf turned and pulled and out onto the straw. And for a terrible few seconds, it lay there still. And then it shook its wet head and drew that first rattling breath, and Danny let out a whoop that echoed off the barn and startled the whole herd. And we knelt there in the straw grinning at each other like fools, an old man and a boy and a brand new life steaming in the cold. And I thought, this is what he tried to sell. This is what a forger's pen was going to trade to a holding company to pay a debt. This exact morning, this heifer, this calf, this boy's whoop in the dark. And it's still here. It's still ours. We kept it. We named that calf, which you're not supposed to do with beef cattle. But Danny named her anyway, and he named her Ruth, and I had to go stand in the tack room a minute so the boy wouldn't see his grandfather come apart. And when I came back out, we didn't say anything about it. We just went on with the morning, because that's how men on a ranch handle a full heart. We let it spill into the work. And the sun came up the way it does out there. No mountains close enough on that side to slow it. Just the whole enormous plain sky going from black to gray to that first hard gold pouring flat across the grass. And I looked out at my land. My land, the deed in the courthouse still saying so, and Danny's name on the paper beside mine now, the daylight way. And I have never in my life felt so rich, and I didn't own a dime more than I'd owned in February. I just knew finally all the way down what the riches actually were, and that no pen could forge them, and no court could quiet them, and no debt could sell them, because they were never written on a paper. They were written on the morning. Nora was up for that calving, and Hazel came down for coffee after, and Gus wandered over the way he does now, most weeks, the way he should have all along, and Bee drove out one Sunday that spring, all the way out to the ranch, because I'd invited her, and I meant it. And I walked that big kind woman all over the place she'd helped me save, and showed her the cottonwood on the hill, and introduced her to a heifer named Ruth, and she laughed her warm-handed laugh and said, I told you the morning belongs to whoever's still standing to see it. And I said, Bia, I'm standing because you wouldn't let a phone call go. And she waved that off the way. Good people wave off the best thing they ever did. And we had supper, all of us, at Ruth's table. The table where the fight was planned and won, and it was full, that table, full of people, the way Ruth always kept it. And I sat at the head of it and looked down the length of it, and I could not, for the life of me, find the gray place I'd been in that winter. It was gone. Not because I'd forgotten it, because it had been filled up. That's the only cure for a gray place I've ever found. You don't empty it out. You fill it up with people and mornings and work and truth until there's no room left in it for the gray. If you're in the gray place right now, listening to this, I know you can't feel that this is coming. I couldn't either. That's the nature of the gray place. It lies to you and says it's permanent, says the table will always be empty and the morning will never come. It's lying. It lied to me and it's lying to you. The morning is coming. It belongs to whoever's still standing to see it. So stand. Just stand one more night and then one more and get your feet on the cold floor at dawn, even when there's no reason to, especially when there's no reason to, because the reason comes after the standing, not before it. First you stand, then, in a while, a longer while than seems fair, the reason walks up and finds you standing there and says, "Good, you waited. Come on, there's grass to see about." And you go, and the gray lifts. And there you are in the gold, some ordinary morning, pulling a calf with a boy you love, so rich you have to go stand in the tack room a minute, wondering how you ever believed the winter when it told you this was over. I think about the others too, sometimes. The ones at Cedar View, who had their minds just fine and had lost only their say. The railroad man named Walt, who wanted to sit on his own front step one more time. Not all of them had a deed with their name on it, and an aide who wouldn't let a phone call go, and a clerk who had read a record out loud. Not all of them got out. That sits on me, and I've decided it ought to, because a man who gets rescued and then forgets the ones still waiting has only been rescued halfway. So I say their names in my own heart, the ones I knew. And I've put a little money and a lot of hours since into the plain work of watching out for old folks in our county who've got nobody watching, driving out to check on them, sitting at their kitchen tables, being the neighbor who comes and looks with his own eyes. It's not much. But it's the rent, I figure, on a spring I didn't earn. When you get handed your life back, you owe a little of it to the ones still fighting for theirs. That's not charity. That's just the books trying to balance. Now, some of you didn't come here for a rancher's philosophy. Some of you came because it's happening right now, to you or to somebody you love, and you need to know what a person actually does. So, let me be practical for a few minutes, plain and useful, the way a neighbor would be if you flagged him down on the road and said, "I think I'm being robbed. What do I do?" I'm no lawyer, and every place has its own rules, and I'll tell you at the end where to get the real advice. But here's what I learned, in the order it mattered. First, if you can feel the ground going, and you don't even know yet exactly how, the way I felt it at that front desk, go find the record. Whatever the thing is that's supposedly been done to your house, your land, your money, there is almost always a piece of paper somewhere, official, that tells the true story, and you have a right to see it. For land, it's the county recorder or registry of deeds, a public office, and any citizen can walk in and ask what the record says about a property, and they have to tell you, because it's yours to know. It's everyone's to know. That's the entire point of keeping it. Go read it with your own eyes. Make somebody read it out loud if you have to. Do not accept anybody's summary of what the paper says. Go look at the paper. The paper is on your side more often than you dare to hope, and there is nothing, that steadies a frightened soul like putting a hand on a hard fact. Second, tell one person who is not the person you're afraid of. This is the hardest and the most important. The whole scheme runs on your silence and your shame, and the moment you break the silence to one trustworthy soul, the spell cracks. A far-off child, a pastor, a neighbor, a doctor, a lawyer. In this country, there are adult protective services in every state whose whole job is to take exactly this call, and there are elder law attorneys, and there are legal aid offices for folks who can't pay, and there are hotlines you can call and just say, "I think a family member is taking advantage of me, and I don't know what to do," and a real human being will help you know what to do. You do not have to have it figured out to make the call. You just have to make the call. Say it out loud to one person. That's the whole first step. Everything else follows from breaking the silence. Third, do not sign anything else and do not confront the one doing it alone. And do not, whatever the fury in you says, try to fix it with your own hands outside the law. I know the rage. I stood on my own porch with it. There is a part of every wrong man that wants to settle it the old way, and that part is a fool because it hands the wrongdoer the one gift that could save them. It makes you the criminal instead. Beat them with paper. I've said it all night, and I'll say it once more because it's the truest tactical thing I know. The truth on paper, filed and stamped and dated, in the same record where they told their lie, will stand after every shouted word and every raised fist has been forgotten. Get a lawyer you chose, not one anybody chose for you. Get to the sheriff or the county attorney, because forging a deed and preying on an elder are crimes, real ones, that real prosecutors will take seriously when you bring them a real record. Let the machinery that decent people built over long years do the work it was built to do. It's slower than a shotgun, and it's the only thing that actually wins. Fourth, gather your own true things while you're at it. Your own real signature, made fresh, in front of witnesses. Your own records of where you were and when. Your own copies of your own documents. In my case, a nursing home logbook and a hallway camera and a notary's own journal did more than any speech I could have made, because they were dumb, honest facts that couldn't be charmed. You'd be surprised how much of the truth is just lying around in ordinary records waiting for somebody to line it up. Line yours up. Keep it somewhere safe, somewhere the other one can't reach. And fifth, this one's not tactics, it's medicine, but it matters as much as any of the rest. Decide, right at the start, that you are going to come out the far side of this still able to love. That sounds strange next to lawyers and records, but hear me. The thing they steal that's hardest to get back isn't the money or even the land. It's your ability to trust, to open your hand to the next person, to not go bitter and closed and alone. And bitterness feels like strength. It feels like you're finally protecting yourself. But it's just the thief finishing the job from a distance, walling you off from the very people who'd have loved you, doing for free what he set out to do for money. Don't let him have that. Fight the fight all the way, hard, to the last paper. And then, on the far side, keep your hand open. Keep a gate that's shut but not locked. Keep a table you fill with people. Refuse to let what one person did to your trust decide what your heart is allowed to do for the rest of your days. That's the last and biggest victory, and it's the only one they can't take in any court, because you award it to yourself. I told you I'd say a word about faith and then leave it, and I keep my word, so here it is. And I'll keep it gentle because I know some of you believe the way I was raised to, and some of you don't believe at all, and I've got no quarrel with any of you tonight. I'm too old, and I've seen too much to think a man's worth is in his creed. It's in his hands, and what they do, and whose they hold. But I'll tell you what that winter gave back to me, since it took so much. It gave me back a thing I'd set down, mad, at Ruth's grave 4 years before. Standing in that gray place with nothing, I found that the very bottom of me, the part under the fear and under the plans, was not empty. There was something down there, old and quiet, that didn't argue and didn't scold, that just steadied me the way you steady a spooked horse, and got my feet on the cold floor at dawn, when there was no earthly reason to stand. I don't need you to call it what I call it. Call it hope, call it Ruth, call it the better angel of your own worn-out heart. I call it God, because that's the name my mother taught me on my knees a long time ago, and I've come back around to it the way a man comes back around to his own home country after wandering. Not because he can prove it's the best country, but because it's his, and he knows the roads. And here's the whole of what I believe, boiled down. And then, I'll let it be. I believe there's a record kept, not just in the courthouse, though thank God for the courthouse, but in some larger book, kept by a hand steadier than any clerk's, where every hidden thing is written down true, the forged deed and the real name both, and where, exactly like Ruth's green ledger, the books balance in the end. Always in the end, not always in the middle, Lord knows, not always when we'd like. The middle of my story was a gray bed in a home, while a lie sat in a county book. But in the end, I believe the man who sows in secret reaps what he sowed, in the dark, at a time not of his choosing, and I've watched it happen to my own son and taken no joy in it. Only a sorrowful kind of awe at how sure it is. And I believe the one who keeps faith with the truth through a hard winter, who won't lie, won't quit, won't go bitter, just stands and gets up at dawn, is handed at last, a spring he didn't earn and couldn't have forced. Grace, the old word is, I got more of it than I deserved. Most of us do, if we live long enough to notice. The trick is noticing. That's all the preaching you'll get from me. Ruth would say it's already more than a rancher's got any business doing, and she'd be right, and I can feel her up on that hill telling me to quit while I'm ahead, so I'll quit. There's one more day I want to give you, because it closes the circle, and I'm a man who likes a circle closed, a gate that hangs true, a fence that meets itself all the way around. The day we made it legal, the day I made Danny my partner in the rocking M, the daylight way, we drove into the county seat together, the boy and me, the same 41 miles I'd driven that first frightened morning, except this time there was nothing frightened in it. Deb Hollis had drawn the papers up clean and honest. Everything in the open, nothing hurried, read 3 times by 3 sets of eyes that all chose to be there. Nora flew up for it. Gus came. And we walked into that same sandstone courthouse, into that same recorder's office with the tall windows and the morning light. And there behind the long oak counter, right where she'd been for 30 years, stood June Halverson, with the gray in her hair and the reading glasses on the chain. She knew what we'd come for. Word travels in a county like ours, and besides, I'd called ahead, because I wanted her hand on it. I wanted the same hand that pulled the forged deed and read my name out loud in that stone room. The hand that said, "This is all still here. Nobody can unwrite it. Come around and sit down." I wanted that same hand to record the true one. And June understood exactly what it meant. I could see it in her face when we came in. And she came around the counter, and she took my hand in both of hers for a second. And she didn't say anything, and she didn't have to. Then she went back behind the counter and did her job, the way she'd done it 10,000 times, the way she'll do it 10,000 more, the quiet, holy work of keeping a free people's memory in ink. She took the deed. She checked it, careful, the way you'd want it checked. She stamped it, and she dated it, and she entered it into the record. The same book, the very same book, where a lie about my land had sat for 3 weeks the winter before. And when it was done, she looked up over the reading glasses, and this time there was no frown, no careful voice, no crime in the room. This time she smiled, and she read it out loud again, on purpose, because I'd asked her to, because I wanted my grandson to hear his name go into that book the honest way, out loud, in front of everyone, the exact opposite of how his father had tried to take it. Owner of record, June read, clear, in that room full of morning light, Earl J. Mercer. And now, added this day, of record, in partnership and in line to inherit, Daniel Mercer. She looked at the boy over her glasses. That's you, son. You're in the book now, the real way. Nobody can ever unwrite it. And I watched my grandson hear his own name read into the permanent memory of the county, the daylight way, earned and given and true. And I watched him understand, all at once and down to the ground, the difference between that and what his father had done. The difference between a name you steal in the dark and a name you're given in the light. Between a paper that lies and a paper that tells the truth. Between cutting a thing loose from the herd and taking your rightful place in it in front of God and June Halverson and everybody. He stood a little taller, walking out of that courthouse than he'd stood walking in. A man does, when his true name goes into a true book. I know. Mine went into that same book 38 years before, the day Ruth and I paid off the banker, and I walked out of there that day feeling exactly the way Danny walked out this one. Like the ground had a hold of me now, and I of it, and it was written down where no charming liar could ever smudge it. We went and had lunch, all of us, at the cafe on the square, and it was loud and good and full, and Hazel joined us, and Bee came, and I sat at the end of another full table looking down the length of it, and I thought about how the same building, that plain old sandstone courthouse, had held the worst day of my life and one of the best 3 seasons apart, and how the difference between them was nothing but the truth coming out into the light where it could stand. The forgery went into that building in the dark and died there. My grandson's name went in the daylight, and it'll live there long after I'm gone. Same book, same clerk, same tall windows and honest morning light. The building didn't change. What changed was that a handful of ordinary people decided the truth was worth carrying up the courthouse steps, and carried it. And once it was up, it stood. That's the whole thing, really. That's everything I've been trying to say all night in one picture, an old man and a boy walking out of a courthouse into the light, with their true names written down together in a book that doesn't lie, because enough good people chose. At the moment, it was theirs to choose, to do the small right thing. Hold that picture. It's the truest one I've got. So, we come to the end, you and I find I don't want to let you go, which is a funny thing to feel about a person you've never met and never will. But I've been talking to you all this long, while like you were right across the fence from me. And somewhere in the telling, you stopped being a stranger. That's what a story does, when it's a true one, even dressed up in changed names and moved fences. It reaches across whatever distance is between two people, and, for a little while, closes it. And closing distances, if you've listened to anything I've said tonight, is just about the whole of what I've learned this land and this life are for. Where are you watching me from, right now, this minute? What town, what county, what country? I asked you at the start, and I'll ask you again at the end. And this time, I want you to actually answer it, out loud or in your heart, wherever you are. At a kitchen table with the coffee gone cold, in a truck in a parking lot, in a bed that isn't your own, in a place that smells of bleach, on the far side of an ocean from everything I've described, in a country where they don't run cattle and never heard of the high plains of Montana. Wherever you are, an old rancher is talking to you, and he sees you. I see the one who's scared for an aging parent and hasn't called in too long. I see the one who's being worked on right now by a helpful hand and a hurried paper and a story about your failing mind, and who's been lying awake wondering if you're crazy for feeling the ground move. I see the one it already happened to, years back, who never told a soul and has carried the shame alone ever since. I see you. You're not crazy. You're not a fool. You're not alone. And it is not too late. Not to make the call, not to go read the record, not to close the distance, not to fill up the gray place, not to keep a hand open even after everything. It is not too late. That's the last true thing I've got. And it's the one I'd most want you to keep. Now, let me ask you for something, plain, the way I've tried to be plain all night. If any word of this landed on you, if it named something you're living through, or handed you something to say to somebody you love, or just let a lonesome heart know it isn't the only one that's been fooled and survived it, then share this story with somebody. Send it to that far-off child who needs to go look in on their folks. Send it to the old friend you've got a bad feeling about. Send it to the one carrying the shame in silence, so they'll know the shame was never theirs. A story like this only does its work when it travels, when it gets from the one who heard it to the one who needs it, and you might be the only bridge between the two. So pass it on. It costs you nothing, and it might save somebody their whole life. The way one aide who wouldn't let a phone call go saved mine. And if you want an old man to keep telling you these true things, because there are more of them, there's always another one. Another family, another quiet theft dressed up as love in another nice town, then subscribe and stay with me. I'll keep talking to you across the fence as long as I've got breath and you've got the patience for a slow-talking rancher. Subscribe so the next one finds you, and leave a word below telling me where you're watching from, because I mean it, I read them, and it does this old heart good to know how far a voice can carry from a hilltop in the middle of nowhere, out to wherever in this wide world you're sitting tonight. That's my whole story. My family put me in a nursing home and sold my ranch, and the deed still had my name on it, my name and mine alone, in my own hand, which I still know how to make. And because of that one hard fact and a handful of ordinary people who did their small right thing at the moment it was theirs to do, I'm sitting here on my own porch, on my own land, an old man rich in every way that a pen can't forge, talking to you. The books balanced in the end, they always do. Keep faith with the truth through your hard winter. Don't quit before the spring. Keep your hand open and your gate shut, but not locked, and go. Right now, tonight. And close a distance with somebody you love, while there's still time, while you still can, before a stranger finds the gap and crawls in. Come the morning, there's grass to see about. There always is. And the morning belongs to whoever's still standing to see it. Stand, friend. I'll be standing too. Good night, and God keep you wherever you're watching from.